afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the special work session of the Ann Arbor City Council. Would our clerk please call the roll of council?
Councilmember Hayner.
Here.
Councilmember Bannister. Councilmember Bannister. I see she's here.
We'll count her as here if no one objects.
Councilmember Griswold.
Here.
Councilmember Lum has reported a technical issue, but she's attempting to log back in.
Similarly,
Councilmember Grand is absent. Councilmember Ackerman.
here.
Mayor Taylor.
Here.
Councilmember Eaton.
Here.
Councilmember Nelson. Here. Councilmember Smith. I just promoted him. Councilmember Smith. And Councilmember Ramlawi. Councilmember Ramlawi, we can't hear you. We have a quorum, Mayor.
Thank you. We have, of course, this is a work session for the purpose of city administrator candidate interviews. We're going to begin at 5 o'clock. Each candidate will have 45 minutes to answer questions from council. There'll then be a short gap period while the various candidates are cycling back in between the several sessions that are going on at the same time. In the meantime, are there any questions for Ms. Sell, the impresaria of the evening? Councilmember Ramlawi? Your audio is still off.
Councilmember Ramlawi, I'll have Jen Grimes contact you.
Councilmember Hayner?
Thanks. I have a question about the format, what's happening here.
Yes.
So I understand that each candidate has a certain amount of questions, and am I reading it correctly that those questions come from, are to be based in these categories? It's weird. Every time I go to open your sample interview questions or your position profile, it's trying to tell me it's a form, and this thing keeps popping up in front of it. But we're to ask those questions based on those sample interview questions, plus however it flows from there. Is that correct? We're just taking turns?
Yes, we are recommending that use the sample interview questions provided. The flow will be, I will welcome the candidate. I will ask two questions myself. Then I will invite each council person in alphabetical order to ask a question, cycling through kind of batting order. So when it comes to the next inning, the next batter up will proceed. I will also endeavor to allow the last 2 to 3 minutes for the candidate to provide closing remarks. And we'll also try very hard to be done after 45 minutes total so that we can stick to the interview schedule. So we do have multiple candidates interviewing concurrently with a 10-minute break in between.
Mayor, I'll just note that Mr. Crawford is the first candidate and he is waiting to join the panel.
All right.
And ideally, we'll be letting each candidate in about 1 to 2 minutes prior, so they have time to kind of settle in and get comfortable. And then we'll try to start right at the beginning time for consistency.
I have a follow-up question based on your explanation of going in order. I actually have questions that I want to ask that aren't necessarily in the grid of sample interview questions. Are you encouraging us to go through the sample interview questions before we tackle any extra questions?
That would be preferred. The preference is to use the sample questions. However, if you have crafted another question based on the guidelines that we've provided, that is acceptable too. The estimation is that each person will probably only have 1 to 2 questions that they'll be able to answer. It could be a little bit tricky because somebody else might have asked one of those questions. So there's definitely room for flexibility. But we are trying to provide a reasonably consistent experience for everyone.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Is that working?
It is, it's soft, but it's there.
All right, thank you. Oops.
If I may, so this grid of questions here, like community engagement, like that sums up somewhat, the first bullet point in there sums up sort of one of the things that you and I talked about, or at least I sent over to you, Amy, about what I'm looking for in an administrator, or the result of having an administrator in place, I guess. So we're just okay to ask that, as long we can phrase it however we would normally phrase a question, and that's okay as long as it's from that grid.
That would be great, yes.
All right.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions as to how we're going to do this?
I'm sorry, I was having issues there. There was questions on how it would work with members asking questions in alphabetical order. Is that correct? Is that?
Yes.
That's correct. The
Okay.
questions will be asked in alphabetical order. Ms. Sell will keep track of that. And we'll notify people on the way.
And so each council member will have one question per candidate, or how does that work?
I think it's unlikely we'll get through the whole thing.
It really depends on how much time the candidates take to answer. It can vary significantly.
Okay. And we can deviate slightly off of these the way I think Councilmember Hayner described in his question.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Thanks for waiting so I could, my computer just went crazy. And it was making a terrible noise. So,
Yeah, mine is too.
yeah, yeah, and then I had a key symbol on the screen. Sounds like Julie was having a similar problem, and now too.
I think the computers are revolting from all the Zoom meetings, I think.
Yeah, maybe so.
It's true.
So Jackie, it's probably fine to let our first candidate enter if you'd like.
Okay, our first candidate is Mr. Crawford, and I'll move him over right now.
Good evening, Tom. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Hi, good evening.
So we're gonna get started in about 1 or 2 more minutes. So just want to let you get settled in, and then we'll begin the proceedings.
Okay.
All right, I think it's about time, so I'll go ahead and get started. I am pleased to introduce Tom Crawford to the City Council panel. To start the interview, I'm going to ask Mr. Crawford 2 initial questions. Then I'm going to call on the interviewers in alphabetical order to ask 1 question. I will then try to tightly facilitate the process to allow Mr. Crawford to have 1 or 2 minutes at the end of the conversation to provide closing remarks. We are on a pretty tight schedule today, and so I apologize in advance if I need to interrupt at any point. So with that, thank you so much, Tom, for being here tonight. My first question is, why are you interested in the position of City Administrator?
Well, first, I'm going to say thank you for having me here. I'm interested in this position because I started public service at the local level about 15 years ago, and really found that as a calling, really enjoyed it, and have spent the time since then really learning and really trying to do as good as I can in public service. I've had the benefit to work in multiple environments, and I'm excited about the opportunity to do that at a different level professionally, and to bring what I've learned and the experiences I've had to try to lead the organization. And so it's really more excitement than anything else.
Thank you. And my second question is, why do you feel that you would be a good fit to be the City Administrator?
Well, over the 15 years that I've been here, I've had the opportunity to experience multiple phases of the city. We were shrinking as an organization and through economically difficult times in the beginning. Then we were through a period of stabilization where we were able to do some long-term planning and some really more thoughtful policy making. And then we were in a growth phase. And so I've seen it in all different aspects. I've also done it as a resident. I put this in my write-up to council. I've seen this in this community as a resident and as an employee as well. And so for me, I come to today feeling that I'm well prepared for what the city faces. And while I don't have all the answers, I look forward to working with the community and council and employees to try to solve them.
Thank you so much. Next, I'd like to invite Councilmember Ackerman for the first question.
Hi, Mr. Crawford. Thank you for being with us today. It's good to see you. I want to turn attention to your leadership style. How would you nurture and manage a diverse team, whether that diversity comes in the form of their backgrounds or viewpoints?
Well, so it's interesting you say it's diversity, because I'm not sure it makes a difference how diverse the team is. You still want to nurture the team by having a team that feels supported. I think kind of from an employee base, I think they have to know that you care about them for their physical safety. And we do that here at the city with the strong safety department. I think they have to know that you care about their career development and who they are and what they aspire to be. And then lastly, you need to compensate them fairly. And if you can get that kind of caring environment, then I think as a team, you really look for opportunities for each person to come to work with their whole selves and find ways that you can encourage that through opportunities, through different experiences, through mentoring, those kinds of things, to make it a rewarding experience for them and hopefully get them to stay and deliver as much as they have here. I do think that diverse teams have an extra opportunity to celebrate in ways that non-diverse teams do, to really grow and perform better. And so, clearly I think that's generally understood, that diverse teams are higher performers. And so I think making room for and encouraging that kind of atmosphere where employees can be themselves really brings that out.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to call on Council Member Bannister.
Okay, I'm gonna choose something from the communications category? And how do you ensure transparent and effective communications?
Well, a lot of my time with the city has been in finance, and so from a transparency standpoint, we really leaned into that, and we put all of our financial records online. And I learned, and we've been doing that for probably a decade now. I really learned from that experience that it really helps people understand what's going on. It results in less questions. It provides you an opportunity to explain things at a different level. As far as effective communication, though, you can't just dump the information out there. You've got to really try to formulate the message and the stories that are behind the data. And that's what we try to do during, for example, since I was talking to finance, the budget times, those offsites, we try to develop a story about what the future looks like kind of economically. And I think that applies to a lot of different situations. As we've gone through the pandemic, I've tried to have effective communications with staff. And part of that is being an empathetic leader. And so it's really trying to talk with employees, which is challenging as environments, but nevertheless can be done. And finding where people are and identifying, making sure that you're able to identify where the good and the bad is, being honest about it. That's really important. And then providing some vision of where you can go. And by doing that, I think the message that you have to convey can be heard better. And it can also be a source of progress as you try to move through whatever situation you're dealing with, whether it's a budget, whether it's a particular program or initiative. I think those things play together.
Thank you. Councilmember Eaton.
Thank you. So to kind of follow up on that, but with regard to communication with the public, the Michigan Freedom of Information Act allows, but does not require the city to withhold certain kinds of public records. Can you explain your approach to disclosure of public records and transparency in general with regard to the public?
Sure. I mean, in general, my philosophy is we share records. I think there's a lot of activity that happens day in and day out in city government where people have questions about information and it's just shared. FOIAs, I think, tend to be bigger issues, as far as if it's not a minor thing to provide, those tend to result in a FOIA because it requires a lot more time and follow-up to prepare. But my philosophy on data sharing is generally fairly open, and I think people have experienced that over the years here, regardless of whether they're the public, a reporter, staff. I mean, FOIA is appropriate in a number of cases, but in general, sharing of information is just part of trust building, and where we can do it, I prefer that we do it.
Thank you. Councilmember Grand.
Thank you. I'd like to ask a question that's related to managing priorities. As we go forward in this time where we have some real financial challenges, but we also have, I think, a very strong vision in terms of where we want to go with some progressive initiatives around policing, around carbon neutrality. How do you think we can go forward in fulfilling the promise of those initiatives, affordable housing, given our constraints?
I mean, that's going to be the challenge, and that is that's where I think strong management comes in. That's not easy, and it starts, with the vision and the policy direction that council has and where they want to go, with an underlying philosophy of sustainability, both economically and in the actions that you do. I'm not. How do you do it? I mean, I think that we have to look for opportunities to, as we go through, the budget is a document that is one of the key documents that council approves in the year. And through that process, you're able to decide the activities you're going to do, you're not going to do, what priorities they're going to have, and then also where you're going to push for additional resources. And it's through that give and take, by going through that I think we can find our way to make progress in all these. And there may be years where you can make progress more in one than another. I think that in managing situations like this, where you're going to be challenged economically, it's especially important to be opportunistic. And so, from where I sit now, I believe as we look forward the next couple of years, one of the things that we want to look for is where outside funding may become available, whether it's federal funding or state grants, those kind of things. Those kind of opportunities, being prepared for those opportunities is really important. So part of the prioritization is not only doing immediately, but it's also preparing for the day when you can get the resources to get it done. This is an and world. We do need to move forward on multiple fronts and do it well as an organization and have a healthy organization. So, there's not a silver bullet to that, but it's the art of management and prioritization and policy making.
Thank you. Councilmember Griswold.
I think you're muted, Councilmember Griswold. Thank you.
Sorry. Okay. Back to communications again. Can you give an example of where you've sought feedback to ensure that your audience heard what you were trying to say, be it council members, the public, or staff?
Sure. An example, one example I have of where I had a lot of communication with the community was in the deer call development of the plan, and I did a lot of communications with the residents, and that involves numerous meetings. And what we did there, in order to make sure we had good communications, I'll just go to that example, was we started meeting separately. All of our meetings had minutes taken. We put them on the web for transparency so that all the other groups, because we had different stakeholders and they wanted to know what everybody else was doing. And that was very transparent. And then to make sure, to get to your point, to make sure that we were heard, we kept coming back from the conversation and saying, okay, let's meet again. And then there we would build on the conversation. Ultimately, we were able to keep having the dialogue, that we were able to get everyone to meet in the same room. And it was challenging because we went into that and we even said to everyone, we know everyone's not going to be happy with what comes out of here, but what we do know is everyone seated at the table is going to get a better outcome, but for you being here. So we needed everybody there to improve the outcome. So it was really the constant dialogue, and to be honest, you've got to have that genuine conversation to make sure that people are heard and really take in what they're saying.
Thanks.
Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you. Thanks for being here, Mr. Crawford. We have a category about community engagement, but city council, my experience in the last couple of years has been a good deal of what I end up doing is public facing, where a member of the community, a resident, will ask or have a concern or possibly a complaint. The thistles are 2 foot high in a playground. And you've seen those emails from me because everything goes through a city administrator. And so how would you ensure that staff and the city is able to provide the high quality service and amenities to residents that we've come to expect, especially when you have high ad valorem taxes here? We have folks who are paying $35 a day and $40, $50 a day in property taxes. And I've had people come to me and say, they should be shoveling my sidewalks for that, So how do you, how are you going to ensure that staff can continue to provide high quality services even as council continues to add on to our policy agenda? Thanks.
Well, one of the communication is one of the key things that I would like to see us go to the next level on. As resources allow, one of the things that I think it's important to do is to shift our mindset from we're delivering the service to you to being a little more, to being more out there and understanding what service is needed. And so that might manifest itself, for example, I've been thinking of a pilot program and award where some city employees are going with council members to a small group meeting, whether it's in somebody's house or whether it's in a, you know, post-pandemic, or some other forum. And we're hearing what the needs are and making that connection. A lot of the needs that you're describing today can be done electronically, but I don't think we can rely completely on this electronic nature of communication. We get some inputs in through the electronic that goes to our work order system. We try to get those done, and then we do blasts of electronics out. But I think that the next step in communication for our community is some level of re-engagement in connection with the residents. They need to know that the staff is here to help solve their problems, and they can come to staff, and council members, you know, obviously are always there to escalate items and to bring bigger items forward. But I think having that connection is something that we can do to help address those issues.
Thank you. Councilmember Lum.
Thank you. Thanks again for being here, Mr. Crawford. This is a financial acumen related question. You've indicated to council that the adverse financial impacts of the pandemic are likely to extend to the next couple of years. Assuming you still believe that, what are the structural actions you believe the city needs to take, and how do you plan to approach those decisions? Also, in retrospect, is there anything you wish you had advocated for or done differently in the time leading up to COVID and in these last 6 months?
Well, that's pretty specific to this situation. What are the things that we can do going forward? You know, I think that I do still feel that this is a 3 to 5 year window. The continued support of the economics of the community, I think, is important, as well as the human service needs of the community, because the community itself needs to move forward. And I think that is an underlying kind of priority that we have to have. You sometimes have to invest, and I think that level of investment is needed. I do think we need to watch the parking revenues. So as the economy comes back or not, what happens with that system is going to be a critically important thing for us to monitor. If it remains weak, the debt service that system carries, that the DDA is responsible for, is something that we have to keep our eye on. We also need to keep our eyes on the returns in the financial markets related to the city's benefits, and for our pension and retired healthcare, and those plans. Those are probably some headwinds. As far as how to deal with those, you know, I think that it's going to be based on our priorities, right? I mean, we're going to go through some tough years where we're going to have conversations about what are the most important things that we need to be delivering in services. How do we deliver those things? And you know, police is one that's in a headline discussion now. So what are you delivering? How we're going to deliver those? And then are there alternative methods? I don't think many of the problems we have today, I think the bigger problems that we have today are going to be solved in partnership with others going forward. And it's not going to be just the city solving these problems. That's probably one of the lessons I think everyone's learned in the pandemic is our troubles in the community and the challenges that we're going to face as a community. We're going to get better results working together. So I'm encouraged with some of the start of that now and some of the things that you're seeing. And, you know, I think we have to lean into that and see where we can find additional opportunities. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you. Hi, Tom.
Hi.
My question is, how would you handle a situation where you were directed by council to take on a project that would take away resources from another initiative?
Well, if the project was coming from one council member, and it kind of depends, I'd say, if the project was coming from one council member and yet it's a broader direction of the city, then that would be one that I'd have to have a conversation with the council member about needing to have greater support to do it. However, I approach most council requests with the how can we get it done approach. And so, you know, I would try to fit it in and see if we can accomplish it within the other priorities that we have. But if we can't, it would be a conversation back to the individual council member or the council members as a whole.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Wamalawi.
Thank you, and appreciate you being here as well, Mr. Crawford. I guess a lot of the questions have been asked, and leads us to maybe your leadership style and how your subordinates describe your leadership style. As this is a fairly big organization, close to 800 employees. You'd be in charge, and I guess it's a very significant trait to ask about.
I'll tell you what I think my leadership style is, and I'll also comment a little bit about what I think others might say. I like to have a plan. So I think as I work with employees over time, you would see kind of a plan, because understanding what's coming up allows us to manage the workload better. I don't really like the crisis of the moment. It comes with the job, so I understand that. But in order to manage through those, I like to have a plan that gets the important parts of the business on track, and I can periodically touch base on those. So right now, we've been doing this for years. We have quarterly meetings. I think we can up our game in those meetings some, and that's something I'm looking forward to, where there's greater communication about all of the important activities, the progress. And I also think we can share that publicly. I think people would say that I empower people. I mean, I don't think I'm a micromanager. For the finance employees that I had in my job prior to this, you know, I had a strong group of managers. I respect their work. I let them do their job, and I let them run. I mean, and I think that's super important for people to feel challenged, to feel the empowerment of them owning what they can do. My role I view as more of a coach. And so I want to provide that feedback as they go along to just keep things in the rails of where they should be. I do believe that, and I would say this is more recent in my career, that the direction setting, vision setting that can be done for management is underappreciated and is really important to be done. And I've enjoyed doing that with the finance organization. I'm looking forward to doing that with the city. People come into public service because they like to serve. And even in today's world, if you don't feel like you're getting a meaningful outcome from the job that you're doing, whether that's personal or otherwise, we're not getting a whole self there. And so for me, you know, I would like to have the whole system work that reinforces the employees to bring that to work. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity to do that through our HR systems, through our management training, and things like that in order to improve it. So I've worked quite a bit in order to do that with my organization in the finance area. Done a lot of work in that, and I would, you know, look forward to bringing that to the city in total.
Thank you.
Councilmember Smith.
Today. My question is going to be, could you describe to me the role of
Chip, it's really hard to hear you.
My question is describe to me your vision of the role of the city administrator in Ann Arbor and how it works optimally with city council.
I think the role of the administrator here is to help council be as effective as they can be. And, you know, obviously staff's job is to implement the policies of council, but it's also to advise council on, with our expertise on things they should consider and directions we should go, with the direction finally being set by council. That's a difficult process. We've seen that here locally change, when there's differing views, and that's natural in any environment. I come to both management of employees and working with the council with the assumption, not only the assumption, I'd say the belief that everyone is in their role for a reason that they personally feel is important. And so tapping into that and understanding it from my seat allows me to work with council members in a more effective way and look to help look for the win-win situations and help council be a group that can make policy decisions. Not that you're going to agree all the time. That's not practical in this world, but hopefully we can get to the that we operate at the point where people feel like they've contributed, they've been heard, and we make a decision and we move on to the next policy issue. There's not going to be any shortage of challenges for council or the organization. And so we've got to actually just start working through them and moving forward.
Thank you. Mayor Taylor.
Thank you. You've touched upon this a little bit, I think, but I want to, have it, at least for me, a little more, centrally asked, directly asked. So we would do everything, of course, in the municipal organization through staff, who are our service professionals. And while we see, some of that, through our observation on city council, so much of it occurs outside the scope. So much of what staff does with residents, for residents, community members is outside the scope. How do you encourage staff? First, I'd like to hear a little bit about your view of staff innovation, and how do you encourage staff innovation? How do you motivate staff innovation?
Well, I think you give people room to feel like they own their job, and you also give them experiences, if you can, that challenges them. Innovation comes from a lot of intersections of different thoughts outside of yourself, typically, right? Stimulus. So it's really, I think, having a positive work environment, giving people the room to do their job, and then and rewarding it too. I mean, if I could give one example, that I have not been in this seat long enough to impact this, but I learned today in a discussion with staff, and it came up because I was asking staff, how are we taking advantage of COVID? How are we taking advantage as an organization of this really difficult time? And found out that we have a police officer who, after the stabbing at Liberty Plaza, took it on himself to grab an iPad and go over to Liberty Plaza, and has started doing Zoom meetings with the court. He worked with the court. And so if someone has a warrant out, they go over there, he sets up a time, they handle it all right there. He's meeting people where they are, taking care of a significant problem. It's not an escalated situation. And that all happened at the officer level, right? That didn't come from a lieutenant, didn't come from me or anything. That kind of innovation and action comes when you give people room and the tools to be creative. And I think you have to reward it. This is something that you'll probably hear more about it within the city discussion, because I want to recognize this officer for what he's done. And that kind of reward is super important, because as an organization, government tends to be risk averse, and it's that risk averseness that we need to get over. And while that wasn't a major risk, it was a big change, and it's a meaningful change in how their job's done, and it reflects the values of what we're doing. So I think there are more examples of that in organization. I think we need to pull those out, and we need to recognize them and celebrate. And then when they don't work out, when we started COVID, one of the things I was hoping to do, I talked with staff about, there was no one out, right? We were stay-at-home order. Wanted to pave the downtown streets, to do the mill and fill and clean them up. They're kind of at different stages of life, but the downtown streets tend to have a more than vehicular use, right? They have a pedestrian and other type use. And so we ran at it, we tried, we didn't make it. The stay-at-home order finished. It's a longer process than we could fit in. but I was glad we tried it. And those things, whether you win or you fail, that kind of thinking and trying creates what I view, what I'll call as agility. And I think we need to build agility into our culture because as people think about a resilient organization, to me, that really revolves around agility. It's your ability to run into a situation, be agile a little bit, and then get back up and try something else. And so it's kind of a muscle, I think, and it's one we just have to exercise.
Thanks.
Councilmember Ackerman.
I'm gonna pass for the second round.
Councilmember Bannister.
We have run through a whole bunch of the questions, but let's see. Back under communications, or no, how about professionally astute? Here's one. You know, council, a lot of times we have a lot of controversial issues that we have to discuss and decide upon. So the question is, how would you handle a situation where there was a split on council on an issue and you were asked for your opinion?
Oh, of course, never happens, but well, I mean, how I handle it, I believe that staff's role is to be professional above all else. And so we need to have our professional view. We're going to share it. And council has the obligation to challenge us on that and poke at it and see if we considered everything and if we've and to see if there are other ideas that are out there that we haven't thought of. And so from my seat, it's staff's role is fairly clear. We're going to give our advice regardless of what I guess a potential power base is on council, and then seek to work with you through that policy discussion. So,
Councilmember Eaton.
Sorry. Thank you. So in a more particular form, we have a great system, the A2 Fix-It, which isn't very responsive to information gathering. Once residents have reported a question or a concern, it either gets fixed or it doesn't, and it's hard for council members to gather information from that system to see how it's working. Do you have any ideas about improving that system?
I'd have to spend more time looking at that, actually. I do think that the visibility into what we're doing, though, is an area that we can improve as we work more on metrics. And I do think that having clearer expectations from staff of the metrics of the goals from council, and then staff developing metrics and stories around what we're doing and how we're trying to achieve those is something we've talked about for years, but it's been very challenging to do at the city. I've recognized that challenge. I think we've made progress in some of the areas. This is, A2 Fix-It is one where there's some good raw data in there. One of the things we're doing here is we've authorized to hire as a data analyst because we actually need more capacity to get into big data. We have put a lot of, we have the infrastructure and I say infrastructure in the sense that we have technology, people, and some of the processes to actually start leveraging that into some really interesting analysis and reporting. It's just been extremely difficult with all the other priorities going on, but it is something that I personally feel fairly strongly about, that it will not only help council feel more informed and the community more informed about what we're doing, but it's will allow us to achieve better solutions as we really get into the data and pick up on some of the things that we may miss when we look at just solving one particular person's issue, we might be able to tease out what some bigger systemic issues are. So.
Thank you.
Councilmember Grand.
Thank you. I think it's a slightly related question, but there's a lot of decisions or a lot of staff recommendations and council decisions that to the lay public may seem really counterintuitive. So, for example, things around traffic, safety, that there's kind of assumptions out there that don't really bear fruit in terms of our best practices. How do you communicate some of those unpopular policies or decisions that are based in best practices to the public that's skeptical?
Well, I do think that one of the things we can do is, one of the roles we have is to try in our communication is try to set the context. The context of an individual decision sometimes is not clear on how it reflects on the bigger system. So while we have these big policies that council has adopted, the master plan, the transportation plan, solid waste plan, I'm not sure that we've done as good a job as we could do on informing people how really complicated and thoughtful those plans are. In fact, as we do the orientation coming up, we're going to try to develop some videos for some council members just to have the time to see and re-see these complicated plans. Getting that information out to people on how an individual decision is part of a more complicated solution, I think is really the way to do it. Now, how much we go out and meet with residents to talk about it, whether we just push it electronically, the communication tools, I think vary by the situation. But I don't think we can stop at it happens at a meeting. If it's a significant item, I think there's an opportunity for us to be engaged with the constituents where they are and try to get that message across, hopefully before, so they understand leading up to the decision, some of that complexity that's going in there. But we invariably are going to miss some people, and we've got to come back afterwards as well.
Councilmember Griswold.
I really liked your comments about agility and being a resilient organization. Can you give an example of where an individual or a group of individuals attempted to do something and they failed, and how you created a culture of acceptance to failure? That if you're going to really strive, you're going to have some failure, and you actually want some failure in the organization. So how do you communicate to employees that that is not only necessary, but that you encourage it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we still have a ways to go to get agility. In this example of trying to take advantage of the roads downtown, and that's a conversation we had. We weren't able to make it. It was a couple of conversations about not being able to make it. Why? Is there anything we can do? Can we move things around? Those kind of things. And then if you don't make it, we just moved on. And there's not a negative out of that necessarily. And so I'm not quite sure, I've got another example I don't have another example that's coming to mind at the moment. That's one that was more recent. So I think as we continue forward, those are examples that we'll come up with, but I'm not thinking of another one right now, sorry.
Okay.
Councilmember Hayner.
Here's a softball. You can go all the way back to when you're in private industry if you'd like for this one. Could you tell us about a major project or idea that was implemented of your efforts, something that you've done in the past, or even here at the city that you feel has had great success for the organization that you were in at the time?
Sure, but before I do, I guess let me just circle back to Councilmember Griswold's question. If I think back over the years here on where we've tried different things, one of the challenges we had when we were doing reductions early on was communicating with the public about the city's budget and the need for reductions. And so I remember we went out to, we decided to have a meeting in each ward, and we took a budget presentation, and we had like 1 or 2 people that would show up. And so that didn't work. And so, you know, we tried again something different for the next year. So then we tried to consolidate them so they weren't in wards. We went each year, I would say we tried something different. Where we ended up was on something like that was we needed to make sure everybody was heard. So now we do the budget kind of completely open. It's in work sessions now. Where everybody gets to see everything. But that I would say the input process for the budgeting is one that we still have not fully, you know, that I'm going to say we've succeeded on. We've done resident surveys more recently. We're trying priority-based budgeting. So one that's kind of close to me is and that is reflective of the finance staff. That's not just me. And our efforts over time have been continued to say, okay, what can we do next in order to help have a budget be more understood by the public and more input obtained from them. So I don't know if that hits your example, but I did want to share that one. As far as you know, something rewarding, you know, I would say, I guess I wrote about it in one of my responses, and that was the deer call. I think that was a very challenging issue because it was a very divisive issue for the community, and council had a lot of people showing up at the meetings, outside meetings. We had, you know, protests, and it lasted for years, right? I mean, to some extent, it's still there. And you know, for me professionally, you know, I worked with a cross-functional internal team, and then we went to develop some expectations on how we were going to attack the problem. It's not in my area, right? I enjoy working with the public. I was looking forward to the opportunity, actually, because I knew it was a challenge that the city had, and I wanted to help the city. And so we set a few kind of priorities on how we wanted to work. And then we went out to the stakeholders and rolled up our sleeves and started to figure our way through it. And, you know, we you know, part of it was really listening. You've got to, you have to do a lot of active listening to really digest where people are coming from and why they're there. And in this particular situation, it was pretty clear pretty early on that there's not a win-win-win scenario, right? And there's no way everybody's going to be happy. So then we decided that, well, we talked to the group about this. You know, honest communication in this process is really key. And we said, okay, listen, let's keep talking and meeting and realize that ultimately staff's going to make a recommendation, but we really need your input. And you don't have to agree with what the recommendation is, but we do need to hear from you. And that kind of liberated, I felt like, the different stakeholders to really give us how they felt and talk with us through it. We then created a program based on that input and tried to be very transparent as we pulled it together to share what we were doing, how we did each year, what the lessons learned were. And of course, in that particular case, we had a survey we did for residents. We had an aggressive goal, actually, of 75% of the community accepting the plan. That wasn't approving the plan, it was accepting the plan. And you know, I'd say we were pretty close to achieving that goal. And that was a goal that we thought was kind of silly high when we started. But so as a program that I kind of jumped in and had my opportunity to work with employees to come up and residents, we came up with creative solutions. We came up with responsible ways to work together on what is really a serious issue as far as, I mean, you're shooting weapons within the city. So it's one that required a lot of thought and planning as well. So so I would say that was one of the more rewarding experiences I've had in it. And I think it reinforces a number of the beliefs that I have on the importance of engaging with the residents and how to work with them.
Thank you so much. So we have about 1 more minute. So I'd like to allow you some time to provide some closing thoughts to council tonight.
Well, council, you know, I will just say, I'm happy to be here. I know this is my third trip in the interim seat. I've learned something every time I've done it. I will learn something if you see your way to give me the job. I will be continuing to learn. I come to this job with a genuine passion for public service, with a real interest in this community. I really love public service, and I like serving this community. And I feel like I have a sense of how the community likes to operate. And because that resonates with me and some of the values of this community, I think I can do a great job. So I come to you with a lot of excitement. I think we have a great team at the city. We obviously have some transition that's going to happen over time, and we have some real challenges in front of us. But I believe, I do believe that it's the hard work that's rewarding, and there's lots of hard work in front of us. I think we've got a solid team. We've got a strong community. I could talk to you for another 30 minutes on the pandemic and lessons learned from that, and how much I've seen from this community, and as far as how it's carrying and things like that. And I just think it's a great situation. I hope I'm a part of it, and I will be in one role or another. So thank you, and I look forward to working with you more.
Thank you so much, Tom. All right, we have a break until 5:53. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're really excited to be able to get to know you better this evening. To start the interview, I'm going to be asking you 2 initial questions. Then I'll be calling on council members in order to ask 1 question. I'll continue to facilitate the process in this manner for about 40 minutes, allowing you an opportunity at the end to provide some closing remarks.
Okay, thank you.
So, and thank you so much for your interest in this critical position for the city. My first question is, why are you interested in this position?
Well, actually, I'm interested in the position for a couple of reasons. First of all, just to give you some background information, I currently work with the state of Michigan as Deputy State Treasurer for state and local finance. And I do enjoy the work that I do for the state of Michigan. However, prior to working with the state, I've worked in several capacities as a city manager or in city administration. And doing that, I have professional development goals that are really important to me. And one of the areas of interest over the years has been being considered as a city administrator with the city of Ann Arbor. And so primarily my interest really lies with my professional goals and objectives. It's very consistent in that regard. And then secondly, I actually reside in Washtenaw County, and I've been a resident in the county for close to 20 years. During the time that I've been here, I commute to various locations throughout the state. And I was thinking, again, it might be an excellent opportunity for me to work in the community where I live and potentially make a difference in terms of working with the city and bringing to the city the skills, the experience that I've had and have basically developed over the years in local government management.
Thank you. And my second question is, why do you think you'd be a good fit for the role?
Well, I think I would be a good fit for the position for several reasons. As I mentioned earlier, in terms of my background and experience, it's fairly extensive. I've worked in a number of communities as a city manager. For example, I worked with the city of Saginaw. I've worked with the city of Flint as an administrator. I've also served in that capacity in Elgin, Illinois, as well as other communities in Michigan, for example, with the city of Inkster. Because of the experience I've gathered over time, I think that I bring to the position a distinctive opportunity in terms of my experience and my abilities. In addition to that, I really do think overall, because I bring a diverse background, it may be an asset to the community. For example, in addition to the areas related to local government, I also have worked and currently work with the state of Michigan. And in that capacity, I oversee state and local finance, which really is directly involved with local government management in terms of our Bureau of Local Government and School Services. I also participate and oversee the area related to financing various communities throughout Michigan.
Thank you so much. Next, I'd like to invite Councilmember Lem to ask a question.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us and for your interest, Ms. Parker. My question relates to community engagement and financial acumen. In response to one of your questions, you referenced the development of a financial operating plan for Allen Park as one of your professional accomplishments. You mentioned focus group meetings with segments of the community, and I'd like to follow up on that a bit. Can you please elaborate on those community meetings?
Okay, Amy, she's fading out, so I cannot hear all of the information.
Can you restate that? I think it was about community meetings in Flint.
I don't know what you heard. I mentioned the development of the financial operating plan for Allen Park that you mentioned as a professional one of your professional accomplishments. And in mentioning that, you cited focus group meetings with segments of the community, and that's what I'd like to follow up on. So if you could you please elaborate on those community meetings, who was engaged, and what was the approach you used, and how the plan was revised to reflect the community input?
Okay, so primarily during the time that I worked in Allen Park, I worked with the city related to some financial issues where the city basically had a deficit. And I was working with the community under contract with the state of Michigan. So as part of that effort, initially coming on board, I spent about 90 days really spending time having discussions with the city council, with the city staff. I had a series of meetings throughout the community to discuss some of the issues associated with the city and to what extent was the reason why the city basically was in deficit. So I got a fairly good understanding in that process and was able to put together an assessment, a financial assessment in terms of where the city was at financially. So once getting the assessment completed, the next step in the process was really reaching out to the community to talk about the information provided as part of that assessment process. And in terms of the focus groups, the approach that I took was actually going out into the community, meeting with seniors in the community at the senior centers. I spent time at the high school meeting with students there at the high school. I had a series of town hall meetings throughout the community to share information related to the assessment. And in addition to that, I conducted a survey in order to get a sense of what others may have thought in reference to the assessment that did not show up for the community meetings. So once I was able to share that information, I was really able to get a sense of what the thoughts were related to the assessment from the community. And then based on the information that I acquired, the second step in the process was actually developing a financial plan for the city. And the financial plan was based on the feedback that I received from stakeholders in the community, as well as evaluating the city's finances. And from there, once the draft was completed, I then took on the responsibility of actually sharing that information again throughout the community to get a sense in terms of whether I clearly understood what the issue was, what some of the solutions were, and to get their feedback related to the proposed plan. The interesting thing about the plan is that from a financial standpoint, I was able to present a plan that would actually address the city's budgetary issues. But what I found from the community meetings is that the community really had a different approach in some areas of the plan. And so as a result, the plan was amended to allow for those changes. And I was really pleased with the process because it was really community driven. An advisory committee was established at the community level to facilitate the implementation of that plan.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
I think I'm gonna take a similar tack to Councilmember Lum. I had one of these questions leads me to something I saw in your resume. Describe your experiences with managing municipal budgets during times of financial uncertainty. And I'm specifically curious about what happened in Highland Park Schools, the decision to outsource to a charter school management. I was curious to hear more about that.
Okay, so in the area related to Highland Park Schools, my involvement was within a time frame to actually work with the administration, work with the school board, and with the community to, again, develop a plan of action that would address their financial deficits. In the case of Highland Park, the deficit was fairly substantial to the extent it required maybe a different approach. And the approach that was taken was actually developing a charter system for the district. So basically, there were two areas. You had the school board that actually had responsibility in terms of the district, but because of the financial status of the district itself, the charter district was established to handle the academic component related to the district. So the school board handled the financial arm, the charter district handled the academic side. A charter provider was brought in to oversee the educational aspects related to the district. And then from there, I worked with the school board to address the deficit and look at what the options were related to addressing the deficit.
Thank you.
Councilmember Malawi.
Thank you, and thanks for joining us, Joyce. Pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
Virtually. Could you describe to us what you believe the role of the city administrator is and how it works optimally with city council here in Ann Arbor? As you may know already, we have a weak mayor system and a strong city administrator. So if you can describe to us, you believe that how that would play out.
Okay, so primarily the city administrator role is one of overseeing the day-to-day operations of the city, first and foremost, to make sure that services are being delivered. The city is being responsive in terms of issues associated with the community, working with the staff, not only to provide services, but to add additional support to facilitate members of the staff. The city administrator is more directly responsible for policy implementation. The actual establishment of policy itself is something that is done by the city council. So primarily the role of the city administrator is to actually move forward with the implementation of policy. The city administrator is also charged with providing support and recommendations, as well as information to the city council in order for the city council to make informed decisions. The city administrator works as a liaison to some extent between the city council and members of the city staff itself in order to make sure that the coordination is in place and that the overall operation of the city is beneficial as it relates to that level of coordination. So I think to a great extent, the city administrator is the person that is directly responsible for the day-to-day operations. However, in terms of policy, that clearly lies with the city council. The city administrator reports to the mayor and city council and has a responsibility to communicate with all members.
Thank you. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you for being here, Ms. Parker. Really appreciate it. My question this evening is, how do you determine what projects and initiatives are worth investing time and resources in?
Well, from my perspective, I'm a very strong advocate of strategic planning and having a fairly good understanding of what the priorities are in order to have a better understanding of how to actually allocate resources. So with strategic planning, with the city council, with input from the community, as well as members of the city staff, it will help lay out a blueprint in terms of where the resources should be allocated, what the priorities are. And in addition to that, I think the other consideration is really having a good working relationship with the mayor and the city council in terms of establishing goals and objectives for the city administrator. And I'm thinking those goals and objectives should be aligned to some extent with the priorities of the city.
Thank you. Mayor Taylor.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Parker, thank you so much for your interest in Ann Arbor and for joining us here today.
Thank you.
You bet. So, well, as you know, everything that we do, in the organization, we do through staff who are our service professionals. And so I'd like you, if you please, to talk a little bit about how you would look to excite our employees, how you'd look to inspire them and encourage them to excel and to innovate.
Well, in terms of the employees or the city staff, to a great extent, I think it's very important to empower the staff to do their jobs and to provide the resources that are necessary in order for them to do their job. So there's several things that I do in terms of working with members of the staff. First of all, I think, again, understanding what the priorities are for the city, the resources that are aligned with those priorities, and making sure that there's a clear communication in terms of what the expectation is. I am not a micromanager. I think to a great extent, we have individuals within an organization that have a level of expertise in place in various departments in order to get the job done. So to a great extent, I rely upon them to do their jobs effectively. I provide to them based on resources, those resources that are necessary in order to get the job done. I think the other consideration is, again, with empowerment, recognizing that with city staff members, they do their best if they believe not only that they understand what the goals, the priorities, and the objectives are, but also recognizing that they have the latitude necessary in order to do their jobs. And so to a great extent, again, I do not really get involved with micromanaging, but I do meet with the staff on a regular basis in order to discuss where they're at on various projects, to track projects. I do meetings with my staff, either one-on-one, in some cases, more frequently if there's a need to do so. For example, if there's some type of immediate or urgent issue, the communication will be more fluid than just a one-on-one meeting with them once a week. And so to a great extent, I think it's important to provide the resources, the support that's necessary, and empower the staff in order for them to do their jobs. I also think professional development is important. So in their particular area of expertise, if there's a need for them to attend conferences or attend various meetings or association meetings in order to receive their certifications, I think it's incumbent upon me as the person in that leadership role to make sure that they have the resources that are necessary.
Thank you.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Thanks for this opportunity to speak, Ms. Parker. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
I want to stay on the theme of your leadership style. So if you wouldn't mind, can you tell me a little bit about how you would nurture and manage a diverse team? And when I'm thinking of that, I'm thinking of the senior staff, your direct reports, whether that's the diversity by background or by points of view.
So you're asking me what my leadership style might be with members of the city staff?
With the senior staff in particular, I'm thinking more about what's your relationship going to look like with your direct reports and amongst your team of direct reports.
Okay. So in terms of leadership style, I tend to be more of a participatory manager or an administrator in most instances, but on some occasions, I might deviate from that particular posture primarily because of the need. So for example, in most cases, as I had mentioned earlier, I do not micromanage, and I do seek out advice from senior staff members, and I rely upon them to a great extent because they are the expert in their particular area. And so from my perspective, I think that it's important to have confidence in your senior staff members in order to deliver services. Saying that, in some cases, especially if it's a situation that might be more in crisis mode that require a different style of management, I'm able to adapt and make that change as appropriate. And so, you know, in most cases, I believe that I am participatory. However, in some cases, if it's an urgent situation that requires a different approach, I'm flexible and I can make that approach as well. So and that's important, I think, in some instances. I think in terms of interacting with the staff, as I had mentioned earlier, a big part of what I try to do is communicate with the staff on an ongoing basis. But in addition to that, I meet with members of the staff perhaps weekly or bi-weekly based on what the need is. I empower the staff to a great extent in order for them to do their jobs and do their jobs effectively. And so I think what you will find is that I'm a strong leader in some instances. However, I work very well as part of the team. I work very hard to develop a team that can work together collectively for the benefit of the community as well as the organization.
Thank you. Councilmember Bannister.
Let's see. Thank you, Joyce, for coming to us today. I was intrigued by your that you've lived in the county for 20 years and that you've been watching us over here in Ann Arbor all that time. So I've been interested in any thoughts you have on elaborating on your interest specifically in Ann Arbor, but also off our questions sheet under communications. One of the key, a lot of our issues are complicated and we don't have a daily print newspaper anymore. So there is a gap and a vacuum where we need transparent and effective communication with the residents. And so I was wondering what you thought of bringing to Ann Arbor with your long-term interest in Ann Arbor, and whether transparent and effective communications would be a priority once you got settled in.
Absolutely. I think to a great extent, coming into a new organization, I would estimate probably the first 3 to 6 months is a time when you spend time in the community as well as with members of the staff and with the elected officials for the area to get a sense of what their thoughts are, what the issues are, spending time getting to know them and allowing them time to get to know me. So I think initially coming on board, I would certainly take the time to meet with segments of the community to share with them information about me, as well as getting information in terms of what they think related to the community. and what the needs are within the community. I also think it's important to be transparent with how you operate, and that's one of the areas where it has been very high with me in terms of my priorities. I think that it's important because we work in a public setting and we work as public servants. And as a result, it's important to be open and not be perceived as being non-responsive to the public. And I think that's something that I would want to communicate with the public early in the process and maintain an open door policy so that they believe and understand that I am accessible. And again, I'm here to work on their behalf. In terms of communication, I think that part of what might be required is to look at options available to communicate on an ongoing basis with members of the public. It might be, again, maybe a newsletter in some cases, just as an update. It may be a matter of doing coffee times periodically with segments of the community so that you have not only the visibility, but being able to actually be available and accessible to the public so that they can have an opportunity to speak with you informally or formally in some cases. And so that's something that I think is very important. And I would share too, this is not directly related to the public, but from an employee perspective, I know you had, I was asked a question related to members of the senior staff, but one of the other areas that's really important is really having opportunities to meet with all of the staff at different times in order to give them an update on where the city is, the organization is at, and answer questions and being accessible again.
Thank you. Councilmember Eaton.
Thank you. Ms. Parker, thank you for showing interest in this position. As you know, the Michigan Freedom of Information Act allows a municipality to withhold information, but it doesn't require withholding information. Can you just reflect on your approach to disclosure of public records?
Well, with you're correct. With the Freedom of Information Act, there are exceptions where there is no requirement to provide information. I think a big part of my philosophy is one of being more open and transparent as opposed to not providing information to the public. I think what you would need to do is really look at the exception to determine what the financial or other impact it might have related to the city and the organization. So for example, if we're talking about negotiating contracts and you're still in that negotiation process, I think in a situation like that, you may not provide the information to any entity at that point in time until you're at a point where you're actually concluding negotiations and you've come up with some type of agreement. However, if it's something that is material that requires, you could actually take the approach of not sharing the information, but there isn't a real good reason to not share the information, then I think that information should be disclosed. I think you'd have to actually look at certain instances on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. Councilmember Grant.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here, Ms. Parker. I really appreciate your time and interest in our community. In your one of your initial responses to Amy Sell's question at the beginning, you said that one of the reasons you were interested is wanting to make an impact on our community. What is one of the initiatives that council has been interested in bringing forward over the last year or so thinking specifically around some of the more progressive issues, because we pride ourselves on wanting to be a leader on many of these issues and initiatives. What would you be excited to take on, and what do you think about your experience that would help us achieve goals in one of those areas? And I have favorites, but don't want to say what they're.
So, you have a number of initiatives underway. I think two that was most intriguing for me is the A20 initiative that's underway. And the rationale for that is how important our environment is. I know that that's something that has been debated based on whatever group that you are affiliated with. But I see changes that have taken place, with our bees and other areas that really is supportive of our environment, that is really being impacted and affected based on what we are doing as individuals within our own communities. As I was reviewing the plan, I thought the strategies that you have in place are excellent, and they are practical and they are achievable if you have the support behind the plan and you have a concerted effort within the community. And that was the other thing that I noticed, is that you do have a number of partners that are willing to work with you in that regard. And so I think that's something that I can embrace and would like to be a part of. I think it's very important. The other area, which is kind of interesting, is related to affordable housing. And I did bring that up to some extent in the video. I'm not as familiar with what has taken place related to affordable housing in the Ann Arbor area, but because I do reside in Washtenaw County, I've noticed that it's been one of your areas of priority for a number of years. And so from my perspective, I've worked in the housing area prior to being a city manager. So as a matter of fact, initially when I got involved with local government, it was in the community development block grant department. And so because I've had an extensive amount of experience in that area, I understand federal programs, state programs, local initiatives, the resources that might be necessary in order to move something like that forward. And I think, again, it's an area where I might be a resource to the city in getting that project where it needs to be. And I really applaud the city because I think both are important, and I would like to be a part of that process.
Councilmember Griswold.
Welcome, Joyce. I appreciate this discussion that we're having this evening. And you talked about how you work with your team and empower your team. I'm wondering, how would your direct reports describe your leadership style?
Well, now I might be a bit biased here.
Yeah.
But, I think my direct reports would, first of all, just based on some of the comments I've gotten, would basically state that I'm inclusive because I do want to hear what members of the staff have to say on various issues. I listen. I sometimes, I step back and listen, and as a result of that, it always allows me to see different perspectives on how to address issues. I think my direct reports would state that I support them. I provide through the resources through the city what is necessary in order for them to have the resources for professional development and other resources in order for them to do their jobs effectively. And I also believe that they would state that I'm a person of integrity, I'm an honest person, and I will advocate for them if there's a need to do so, especially if it's important in terms of what the issue is. So I tend to support the staff. Now, what they will also state is if there's an issue or concern, I will address that as well. However, I will address it in a manner with some consideration in terms of treating them with respect in terms of how the issues are addressed. But I think you'll find across the board, if you ask those that have worked for me what they think, I believe those are the comments that you would receive.
Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you. And thanks for joining us tonight, Ms. Parker.
Thank you.
So, yeah, looking at your resume, and I grew up in Saginaw. My folks still live there, and I worked in Flint also. And so I'm kind of familiar with those communities, and Buena Vista also. And as we all know, those communities have been through their troubled times, you know.
They have.
And in a way, they're unfortunately, they're still kind of headed in the opposite directions of Ann Arbor. So I guess that gets to my question, which is, are there certain, do you believe that there's different best practices for different types of communities? And how would you say that you stay current with municipal best practices?
Well, I don't know if I would say that there are different best practices for various communities as much as where a community might be at a certain point in time. So based on where a community might be at a certain point in time, the strategy that might be necessary is different, primarily because of the status of that particular community. So for example, you mentioned Saginaw, you mentioned Flint. When I worked in the Saginaw area, part of what I considered was the priorities for that community at that point in time. In terms of values, ethics, things of that nature, I think to a great extent, all of that is consistently the same, but their issues were different. So as a result, the way the issues were addressed were different. However, when I worked in the Illinois area, their issues were entirely different. For example, there, the primary concern was, how to allocate their resources to support organizations throughout the community. So to a great extent, I did look at best practices at that point in time based on those issues. So I think you have to take a look at the community, what their needs are, and as a result, structure those strategies based on what those needs are. Now, in terms of the question about resources that might be available to identify best practices, there's a wealth of resources available through our state association for municipal managers, as well as at the national area with the International City County Management Association. There's a number of resources related to not only written information, but there are support resources available to managers, and I lean heavily in that area as well.
Thank you.
Councilmember Lum.
Thank you. And thanks again, Joyce. This is a bit of a follow-on to the municipal best practice in the financial acumen arena, if you will. In your current position as the Deputy State Treasurer, in your experience as a consultant and advisor to municipalities, I'm sure that you've seen innovative programs or effective financial strategies that caught your attention. And I'm wondering if you could just please elaborate on one or two that you believe might be appropriate for Ann Arbor.
Well, the one that comes to mind that might be somewhat appropriate to Ann Arbor is during the time that I worked with the city of Allen Park. And with the Allen Park example, the city actually owned property that is known as the studio properties. And the goal at that point in time was to actually have a movie studio in Allen Park. There was an interest in having resources at the state level as well as locally to help materialize that dream to have the movie studio there in Allen Park. Well, it did not take place. And as a result, the city had a deficit based on the debt service associated with the purchase of the property, which was 104 acres. In addition to that, the city suffered as a result of taxable values decreasing substantially when the housing market declined in 2008, I believe. And then just overall operational issues that required some type of consideration. So all three of those things really created problems for Allen Park. In addition to that, the city had their city hall facilities next to the movie studio property, but the building was really dilapidated and in a poor state of repair. So as part of what took place to bring their budget back in balance is basically selling the studio properties. And in selling the studio properties, we entered into a development agreement. The agreement allowed the city not only to have some type of involvement in the type of development that would actually take place with those properties, it also provided for the city to relocate City Hall into some of the property there at the studio location up to 5 years, which allowed then the city to be in a better work area for their employees. And so I bring that up because I think it's an analogy in terms of what could occur, you know, as you talk about development and affordable housing issues and how you might be able to leverage some of the things that you're looking for just based on various projects that you might have underway. And so that's the comparison that I'm trying to make.
Thank you so much. So we're just about out of time with interview questions, but I'd like to offer you a minute or two to provide some wrap-up final comments.
Okay, so, you know, first of all, I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone on the City Council for giving me time on your agenda this afternoon as part of this interview process. I think it's given me an opportunity to have a better understanding of your issues and a better understanding in terms of how I might be able to support the community as well as the city organization. You know, as we talked about this afternoon, one conclusion that I've made is that I still do believe that I'm a good fit for the position for a number of reasons. First of all, I've had 20 plus years of experience working as a city manager, an assistant city manager, a financial analyst. I've had experience working in all aspects of local government. And as a result, I believe that the skills that I've developed over those years is something that would be an asset to the city of Ann Arbor. In addition to that, I've had an opportunity to work in communities that actually have universities. Now, maybe not to the extent of the University of Michigan, but to a great extent, they're very reputable universities. For example, when I worked for the city of Saginaw, Saginaw Valley State University is there. And as part of my role as city manager, I interacted with the leadership there on a regular basis. And provided advice if there was a need for various projects where the city should be involved. I was part of that process as well. When I worked in Elgin, Illinois, the city had Judson College, and the city was actively involved with realigning their campus and providing a level of support to the college. And so I think that in that regard, I'm a good fit related to the position. I'm also experienced with budgets and financial forecasting and financial planning is probably one of my greater strengths. When you take a look at my background and experience, as I mentioned earlier, my career in local government started as a financial analyst. And then later over the years, I worked extensively as part of the budgeting process, really allowing the process to be a communication tool where not only was the city council and the city staff was involved, but the community was involved, and the strategic plan and priorities for the community was part of that process. And so I think to a great extent, I bring that level of experience to the city of Ann Arbor. I've done multi-year planning in terms of budgeting, forecasting. I've dealt with deficit elimination plans, so I'm very versed as it relates to budget and finance. And then I think the other area that's very important, well, two other areas, one related to community engagement and transparency. I think it's so important to engage the community, to be a part of the community, to be open and accessible to the community. And so I believe if you check my background over the years, you will find that that's one of my areas of strength. And then finally, I'd like to touch on diversity and inclusion. I think it's very important for an organization to be diverse and to be inclusive. I think an organization is better off as a result of that because you have the benefit of various views, diverse views on various issues based on individuals' background and their experience. And so I think what I would bring to the organization is the experience I've had over my career. As an example, I was one of the founding individuals related to the Fair Housing Center in Michigan. And I've participated in a number of other initiatives to really further diversity and equity within organizations. And I think it's important in terms of employee engagement as well. And so those are some of the things that I believe professionally I bring to the city of Ann Arbor. I would also close stating that I believe that I am a competent city administrator with a proven track record. And then I am also a resident here in Washtenaw County. And as a result of being a resident, I think that I bring with my involvement with the city some type of faster, more accelerated transition into the position with the city of Ann Arbor. And with that, I'd like to thank all of you again for allowing me to participate in your process.
Thank you so much, Joyce. It was a pleasure to have you here tonight. All right, we're going to take a short break and we're going to reconvene at 6:48. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm pleased to introduce to council Kara Pavlicek. To start the interview, I'm going to be asking her 2 initial questions. Then I'm going to call on the interviewers, leaving off where we were before, and then proceeding in alphabetical order to ask 1 question. And I'll continue through that process for approximately 40 minutes. And then allowing Ms. Pavlicek 1 to 2 minutes to provide closing remarks towards the end. So I apologize in advance if I have to interrupt everybody, but I'm trying to keep on that schedule today. So with that, first of all, thank you so much for your interest in the city administrator position. And I'd like to ask you, why are you interested in joining in this role in Ann Arbor?
Thanks, Amy. Thank you, everyone. I'm happy to be here this evening. My very first job working in city government was for the city of Des Moines, Iowa. And I quickly just fell in love with the entire process of representative democracy at the local level. Des Moines was a very, and still is, amazing community. It had things like an airport and a zoo and parks and golf courses, public housing, and it just dealt with so many complex and robust issues that seemed more than what I learned in graduate school, which was a lot of budgeting, which is an incredibly important part, but it introduced me to the other side of city management and city government. And so throughout my career, I have been very fortunate to work in several states and work in several communities. I work right now for a wonderful organization, Oak Park, Illinois. I really do absolutely love it, but opportunities like Ann Arbor with its size and complexity just don't always come along. And I think I could add value to the city in the role of city administrator.
I think, well, that kind of leads into my next question is, why do you think you'd be a good fit for the position?
So I think what I bring to the table is, again, those experiences over the past 30 years working in multiple organizations that have approached the just really tough issues of city government. City government is complex. It's not something that is for the faint of heart. It takes hard work. And I see that Ann Arbor wants to work on a lot of those tough issues that I'm passionate about. And I've learned along the way. Sometimes I've learned because I've been in a community and we've been successful, but I've probably learned just as much when I've been in a community and we haven't gotten it exactly right and we fumbled our way through a process, but we've still done good things. And so I don't believe that my experience allows me to come to an Ann Arbor and say, here's the right answer, but I'm a process person and I'm very strategic in how I approach problem solving. And I think that that skill set could be very helpful as Ann Arbor takes hopefully what is soon the next phase of coming out of COVID and dealing with a lot of the social issues and economic issues that communities are all going to be facing.
Thank you so much. Next, I'd like to invite Councilmember Nelson to ask the next question.
Hi.
Hello.
I grew up outside of Chicago, so I was reading about your experiences in Oak Park and Downers Grove and bringing back fond memories. I have a question about how you determine what projects and initiatives are worth investing time and resources in. And I want to point to an explanation that you gave in some of your materials where you explained about your downtown in Oak Park, that you were revitalizing an area that was approaching economic irrelevance. And I was curious to hear more about that, like how you defined irrelevance and like what you were looking at and what problem you were trying to solve.
So I tend to focus my time and energies on 2 paths. In the annual life of city government, there are things that happen over the course of the year that happen every single year, a budget process, an audit process, and seasonal changes. And so those things clearly are repetitive and take time and attention. And then the other items that as staff and a city administrator we focus on are those items that have been identified as the highest priorities by the city council. The comment I made about downtown Oak Park and the investments that have been made over the last, roughly 8 years, and what I meant by economic irrelevance was that Oak Park had done the things that a lot of communities did many decades ago about creating a pedestrian mall. But then the retail economy changed, and communities like Oak Park could no longer have anchor department stores. Those moved away to shopping malls and lifestyle centers that first ring suburbs that are urban weren't able to compete with. And so Oak Park doesn't have strip malls, and we don't have big box retail. And we as a community had to go through a comprehensive planning process, and specifically the community did before I got there, a downtown master planning process. And then as the staff, we've got to spend time making that vision a reality in partnership with the private sector, in partnership with the elected officials, and in partnership with a lot of our community members that believed in the vision of making downtown a livable neighborhood.
Thank you. Councilmember Ramwali.
Thank you, Kara, for joining us tonight. Pleasure meeting you virtually. And you come with quite a resume and accomplishments and experience. And so obviously that's what struck our interest. Could you describe, with all that experience, a major project or idea that was implemented primarily because of your efforts? And with that, the challenges that came with it and how you overcame those?
I don't know if I can take personal credit for anything. It is such a team sport in city government that there are so many people that work together. But I certainly try to bring forward to the governing body issues that are important and issues that we have to deal with. So when I worked for the city of La Vista, Nebraska, we were a small, rapidly growing blue collar community. And our public services and the infrastructure that we had, also being a young community that had only been incorporated around 1960, wasn't where it needed to be for the rapidly growing community. And so really in partnership with the mayor at the time and a number of key staff, we worked together with the local community college that was a Sarpy County Community College, and really saw from fruition the way to develop a partnership. We structured it almost as if a condo relationship existed, where the city government built a library, the community college built a community college campus. We had common areas that we shared, and we really expanded our library to meet the needs of the community college, which traditional, library systems are different when they're in the educational arena versus the municipal arena. But we really got everybody together. We figured out the economic challenges to making this a reality. We were very strategic in terms of sustainable energy and the development of the project. And it opened, and it has been an amazing asset for that community now for a number of years, probably going on 15 to 20 years. And it was something that, again, I can't take credit for it, but I was at the table, and I'm very proud of that project.
Thank you.
Councilmember Smith.
Thanks. Thanks for being with us, Kara. We really appreciate having the opportunity to talk to you. My question is going to be a little bit about your communication style, and could you talk a little bit about your communication style with staff, and break it down, talk about it with staff, how you communicate effectively with council, how you communicate with the community, and how you make sure that communication is both effective and transparent.
Okay, sure. Thank you. So in communication with staff, one of the processes that I've utilized for a number of years is They're just called one-on-one meetings. So I have 15 direct reports currently, and I have every single week a half-hour time set aside with each one. And it's a standing regular meeting, and the meeting is for the direct report. So Mondays I have fire chief and public works director, deputy village manager, city clerk, for example. You know, Tuesdays a CFO, adjudication, others. That opportunity sort of helps us stay away from communicating via email. Of course, in COVID, now we're communicating a lot like this, but those are really important opportunities for me to hear from the leaders within the organization about the things that they need, and then what I can be doing to help support them. It also just gives me the opportunity to know people more on a personal level, which I think really creates a stronger working environment. In terms of communicating with the city council or, you know, park, they are called the board of trustees. I believe strongly in, you know, tell one, tell all. So we have currently, our elected officials really do prefer to use email as a source of communication. And so there are a lot of conversations that may happen that way. They're shared with every elected official, but I also communicate on a formal basis every Friday, just in a document to kind of give the village board highlights of what's going on. That document is available to the public on the website. And then also during COVID, we really changed and also added daily communications that now, because things are a little bit better, we're doing them 3 times a week. But again, it's more of a document that's pushed out electronically, available to the public on the website, but just trying to give everybody regular information at the same time. I also, though, do think it's very valuable to have direct conversations or, you know, telephone conversations with individual elected officials, because I think that's very important. With the community, it can be a little more challenging, especially during COVID with those communications, but I'm always available to go out and meet with groups. I serve on different organizations, whether it's the Economic Development Corporation, on their board of directors, and that gives me a lot of formal opportunities for communication. But the other thing is just making sure you're always willing to answer the phone call and talk to people that need information.
Thank you. Mayor Taylor.
Excellent, thank you. And Ms. Pavlicek, thank you for joining us virtually here in Ann Arbor and for your interest today too. We're grateful for it.
Thank you.
So, you know, as you know, everything that we do here in the municipal organization, we do through our staff, our service professionals. And so, what I'd like you to do, please, is talk to us a little bit about how you would expect to excite our employees, how you would expect to inspire them and to encourage them to innovate and to excel.
I think one of the most important things you can do to encourage people to be innovative and excel is to accept failure. Organizations that are not are able to not overreact when something goes wrong, but to say, hey, what have we learned from this? That's incredibly important. And I think that's a real key to successful and innovative organizations. What I try to do with the staff is be consistent, to be who I am. I'm available to them, and make sure that I'm always there trying to help them creatively problem solve. That is something that I enjoy doing. So I always have to put myself in check and make sure that I'm listening to them and letting them offer the solutions first, rather than just letting the wheels turn in my own head and go, oh my gosh, I have a great idea, let's do this. So that's something I probably learned over my career. But I also think the occasional nice activity around the workforce doesn't hurt. So if you can have every now and then a snow cone social, I think sometimes that can be a lot of fun in the organization, and employees can be really appreciative of it. The last thing I think you have to do is you have to get out of your own office. You have to go out to the firehouses. You have to go out to those places of work and see the employees where they're at and participate with them in their space.
Thanks a lot.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you for being here. I know you have a lot of direct reports currently. If you came to the city of Ann Arbor, you'd have a lot of direct reports here. You shared a little bit about one-way communication with them, but would you mind discussing how you would nurture and manage a diverse team as a whole? and whether that diversity be background or by point of view?
I think that in city government, having a lot of voices and perspective at the table does make for better recommendations to the city council. So I do try to support department directors or the management team as a group creatively thinking and problem solving together. So there are always going to be, for example, fiscal challenges in the budget process. I have never been a fan or supportive of saying we're just going to do an across the board cut of everyone. I think we have to look and recognize that there's certain areas that are very small and lean operations that are essential in city government, and other activities that are larger and may have more resources that they are annually using to provide services. And so the strategic conversation comes when you try to put everybody together and say, who can take a turn at doing something differently? Or if we all work together, could we be successful at making this change in our operations for the good of what we're trying to do? I really do believe the city administrator's role is that we're a facilitator and we're an architect of yes. And we have to support people that are experts in their own industry and city government. So someone's an expert at engineering and someone's an expert at fire services or law enforcement. They might not be an expert at the bureaucratic process. And so that's where I think the role of the city administrator is so crucial, is helping partner with those industry experts in their unique municipal environment about how they get to the policymakers the recommendations that are important that will allow them to be better at the service they do.
Thank you. Councilmember Bannister.
Yes, thank you. Mike, I'm going to use a question from the community engagement list. We have a obviously limited budget and limited resources, and yet we want to provide high quality service and amenities to residents. And so we have digital platforms like a C-Click Fix where we encourage residents to use online questions, but not everyone's up to speed on that, or they need more assistance. So in this complex world with limited scarce resources, what could you as city administrator do to ensure that staff are able to provide the maximum high quality service and amenities to residents given those limitations?
Well, I think that Ann Arbor is no different than other cities in that the modernization of the delivery of public services is at the forefront of what we all have to be focusing on over the next few years. And we are certainly in a time period where technology is shifting. And so, as you said, we have some folks that want to consume information or access government in very traditional, non-technology based manners. And then there's a whole other generation of the public that is happy with a smartphone and is not come to City Hall, and they're quite comfortable consuming services in an electronic means. At some point, the shift really is going to have to go more into technology, and that's going to be difficult. And so maybe there are opportunities and ways to more mobile City Hall services, or, you know, at libraries and other public places where people that don't have maybe access to all of the digital media can still access services. Will allow us in a number of areas of city government to become more efficient in the delivery of services through the use of technology. I think we have to always remember, though, that we still are a people-based industry and city government. And if it's a snowplow driver or a firefighter, those folks deliver their service in person and we're really never by technology. And so there's challenges and it's complex, but I think there is going to be a shift as cities become smarter in how they deliver services. And the city administrator's job is to challenge staff to always be looking for those ways to improve service delivery that is both efficient and protects quality.
Thank you. Councilmember Eaton.
Thank you. And welcome to Ann Arbor. I'm so happy that you showed interest in our city.
Thank you.
We're facing some significant budget challenges, and I'm just wondering how you look at the need to restructure staff to respond to budget shortfalls, and how do you structure staff to respond to the council's priorities?
Well, I think you do start with your last statement. We have to understand the council's priorities. And then secondarily, we have to be willing to take a very critical eye at the way we deliver services. What I've at least experienced in working in 4 different communities is it never fails that we do things in city government because that's the way we've always done things in city government. And what I've learned in each of those 4 communities is there is a myriad of ways to still get to the outcome or the policy that the city council is looking for. And sometimes we have to change the way we're framing the issue. And I also think that we oftentimes place staff within certain roles, and we have to be willing to listen to them. And sometimes incidents like COVID-19 come along, and for most communities, we pivoted very, very quickly, providing services remotely that had you asked me a year ago if we could do building inspections remotely, I wouldn't have given it much thought. And now I know we're accepted at providing building inspection services remotely because a number of in the organization believed they could do it, and they took the initiative and they did it. And the role of city administrator was the barriers and make sure that that could happen. So I think we've got opportunities again to not just assume because we've done things a certain way, it's how we have to do them, and look at what barriers have to be moved so that we can change the way we deliver services. I think that answered your question.
Councilmember Grand.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Pavlicek, for being here. We're excited to have you. So we have, even given the financial constraints of COVID, a lot of major, what I would term progressive initiatives that the community is really excited about. Can you give us an example of 1 or 2 that you would be most excited to work on, and how your experience will help us get there?
I think, I took a look at planning documents that are on the Ann Arbor website, and I think if I had to pick maybe the top 3 initiatives on the strategic plan that I'd be most excited to work on would be housing diversity, economic vitality, and human services. So I think those are 3 areas that I both feel like I have a real experience in history working in those arenas and have a lot of ideas about them. And then also in the area of human services, just a lot of passion for that. So those would be the 3 I would list.
Councilmember Griswold.
Yes, welcome to Ann Arbor, if only by Zoom.
Yeah, thank
you. I appreciated your comment about being a process person. And I'm wondering how your subordinates would describe you, or how they have described you in the past.
Yeah, that's always a tough question. So I'll tell you how I hope they describe me, but you might have to, I might have to give you a couple phone numbers to check on me. I would hope they would tell you that I do what I say I'm going to do. I'm accountable to them. I hope that they also talk about ethical, and I believe that we work at the pleasure of the public and we are accountable to them, and that we always be truthful in how we deliver information. And also that I hope that they feel that I try to promote a sense of stewardship for the communities that we serve. And probably the last thing I guess I would say, try to instill in employees the idea that we should treat everybody as if they were our own grandmother. So.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hayner.
Thanks. Thanks for joining us here tonight. Let me see here. I guess I'm interested in community initiatives. We have a lot of folks in our community who are they're kind of go-getters. They like to organize. They like to get stuff done. They like to bring projects to us as a city. Could you tell us about a situation where there was some project, perhaps, that have you had experience where there's been a project that kind of came up out of the community, a community development type initiative or something that you led, or you could share a little information about that and how it was implemented to the community's satisfaction?
So Park, there are lots of community initiatives, and I would not say that the village manager then leads those, but hopefully we are creating a pathway forward for be successful. So I think clearly we have a most recent one, and I know you have all just addressed this also, we call it Slow Streets. So we had a Bike Walk Oak Park group that was very interested in us creating some of the slow streets or reducing traditional vehicular traffic on streets and creating more areas for pedestrian and bicycling. And that has came forward during COVID. The village board held a policy debate about it. And then we recently have a pilot program that we're working on right now. I think that's probably a good example. We've had a lot of other groups, I think, active in promoting sustainability related activities as well. Another example would be creating like almost like a greenway trail for monarch butterflies and creating designated areas. And again, it's really happening all in the private sector. And we try to support those initiatives where we can as the local government.
Councilmember Lum.
Thank you. And yes, thank you for joining us and for your interest in Ms. Pavlicek. Nice to meet you in the flesh. Yeah, version of that. So a follow on about community engagement. And this, I'm looking at the response to the question on your professional accomplishments where you referenced the financial turnaround in Oak Park. So I would like to hear you, if you could elaborate on how that was accomplished by revenue increases, expense cuts, asset sales, et cetera, and more importantly, the process and the approach that you use to make these decisions.
Sure. I think for purposes of time, I'm going to focus on really the parking fund. So when I started in Oak Park, I was at the department director level, really over the parking system, and spent a little less than 4 years there. And when I was hired, the Village of Oak Park had already received a study on changes that needed to be done to its parking system, which is fairly massive and fairly complex and has some revenue generating areas and others that are not. But it was running a $10 million deficit. And so the process did include revenue increases. So one of the things was to raise both hourly parking meters, change the revenues in the parking garages, and then also address a lot of on-street permits that are sold for overnight parking. We're a dense community. A lot of our multifamily properties are vintage and were built before the onset of automobiles, and they were developed without parking. And so we have an entire permitting system. So yes, there was revenue associated with those balancing that budget, but there was also an equal number of expenditure reductions that were done. So we did streamline staff through attrition. We would not replace positions. We would move people into different roles that we felt was able to accomplish what we needed to do. And it was a multi-year process. In terms of community engagement, because I did come after a study had been completed, I missed the initial community engagement. But as you can imagine, when hourly parking fee changes in commercial districts implemented, sometimes going from 25 cents an hour to $1 an hour, we had additional community engagement. And at times we walked some of the recommendations from the consultant after we had dialogue with this community and brought that forward to our elected officials. They would be things like the number of hours we would charge help. But I think it's important to know that although we'd gone through a planning process, or the community had gone through a planning process, during implementation, when something is needed, you do have to step back and get some additional involvement and then rethink what you're looking at doing. I hope that answers what you were looking for.
Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you. How would you handle a situation where you were directed by council to take on a project that would take away resources from another initiative?
Well, I think you just have to be honest during the process and make sure that there's an understanding at the city council level that resources are finite, and that you want to assure that everyone is clear that the resource shift will occur, what will be the impact on the resources, and communicate publicly as well about that. So it's not about saying to the city council, you can't do this, but it's about just making sure that everybody understands that maybe project A is now going to take 18 months instead of 12 months, but project B is going to, happen in 6 months. And that if the city council is saying that's the priority and where it needs to happen at, it, as staff, then we have to respect that and move forward pretty rapidly.
Thank you.
Councilmember Ramali.
Thank you. Second time up. I guess I'll leave it with this. How would you handle a situation where there was a split on council on an issue, and you were asked for your opinion, and maybe just not your opinion, but maybe to weigh in on the matter a little bit strongly rather than just staying neutral? How do you handle that in public service in your position?
Yeah, very, very diplomatically, first and foremost. No, in all seriousness, I do think that there are times, and it's becoming increasingly common, challenging situation that many communities are in today, that there are split votes on council. And it is a representative democracy. And the city administrator or village manager, when asked, does need to provide a recommendation and provide rationale for that recommendation. However, once the council votes, then you have to, as the implementer of that policy, be 100% behind it and move forward with that. That's the nature of the governments that we have, and it's really important that you can be neutral as the staff member, but it's okay to give a recommendation and advocate for a certain position before the vote is in.
Thank you.
Councilmember Smith.
I will pass, thanks.
Mayor Taylor.
There now, thank you, and you now can hear me say thank you. So this gets, we all, of course, are at tension between, between what present residents are asking for, requesting, and what we believe to be, what would we, and having to also consider the future residents and future community members who have yet to show up. And I guess, as you think through what your philosophy of government, your participation in the recommendations with respect to policy, how do you balance those two things? How do you balance the interests of future residents with the requests or advocacy of current residents?
So a couple ways. I mean, cities are going to be here for the long haul. And I absolutely believe that one of the toughest jobs elected officials and appointed staff have is to make decisions for the community's children's children. And so much of what we do, making an investment that is going to last 50 years. And it has to then be balanced with the financial impact on today's community. So things like pay-as-you-go financing or other different tools that we use are part of those decisions. And if you just want to talk in terms of, say, housing diversity, actions about growing a community today are about responding to what we think the economic reality of cities will be in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And so I think you have to be thoughtful about it. You have to understand what the concerns of the current residents are, and we can't dismiss them. But decisions are made by the elected representatives because they have the time to get all the pieces of information before them in making those decisions. And I think part of the job of the staff is to make sure you've got that information in a way that can be explained to the public as well. It doesn't mean you're going to change minds, and it's not going to make the job any easier, but I think that's the job.
Thanks.
Yeah. Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you. I think Councilmember Griswold asked a really wonderful question earlier in another session that I'll repeat. A really important part of innovation is creating space for people to try new things, and often that results in failure. So how do you create an environment in which that failure is put to good use and learn from?
Yeah, I think it does start with the elected officials. So staff has to feel safe coming to the city council with a creative idea. And even if the city council says no, it can be the way in which they say no. And that then flows to the entire management team in the same manner to say to their employees, I appreciate that you brought forward an idea. I appreciate that it didn't turn out the way we all wanted it to, but everyone is glad we tried. So I do think it's about from the top throughout the entire organization being open to failure and asking questions, not asking, why did this go wrong? Why isn't this happening? But asking, what have we learned? How would we have done something different? So I do think it's all about that sort of interpersonal relationship and the dialogue between elected and appointed officials.
Councilmember Bannister.
Well, under the communications category, we don't have a daily newspaper here anymore. And so there's a need for transparent and effective communications. Do you have any thoughts on how in a town without a newspaper, a daily newspaper, how you could make sure everyone is up to speed on what's really happening at City Hall?
I think it's interesting that social media has maybe put us all in a position of daily information overload. And so oftentimes city communication is static. We post it on our website and therefore we believe it's there, we're transparent, and somebody's got to go find it. But it's a challenge to invest in the technologies at a city government level that can let people customize and only select the information they want to get. But I would be hopeful that in a community like Ann Arbor with an amazing university system, there could perhaps be some creative partnerships to try and begin to test different ways to deliver information. But I still think a lot of it's going to be based upon social media and digital platforms, which will continue to leave out one segment of the population. And those are challenges that I think we all have to look at differently in trying to find other ways to connect with people who don't consume information on a smartphone.
Thank you so much. So we're getting close to time. So I want to make sure to provide you with a few minutes to provide some closing thoughts to council.
Okay, thanks, Amy. So first of all, I'm still getting used to doing an interview on Zoom. So if my eyeballs have jumped from different corners of the screen, my apologies. I think secondly, I just want to say thank you to each of you. I think the job of an elected official at the local level is harder than any other job that anyone can undertake. I think, though, it is also one of the most important pieces of public service in today that exists. And probably sometimes you just hear a lot of the negative information. But I took some time today and I was reading your national citizens, and I was very impressed with the numbers about how many folks in Ann Arbor ranked the city government services as good and excellent. And I think that's something to really be proud of, even when you're doing a lot of hard work to change and move forward in today's day and age, which is something we all have to do. So I just want to say my compliments to you for all the work you've done. And I would really like the opportunity to continue to the next phase of the process. I do think I have value that I could add to the organization, and I'd like the opportunity to discuss it with you further. So thank you. Thank you to Amy for all of her work in organizing this for us. And again, I appreciate your time and best of luck with the rest of the day.
Thank you so much for being here, Kara. Truly a pleasure. All right, now we're going to take a little bit of a break and we'll reconvene at 7:43. thrilled to have Eric Webster here to get to know council tonight. To start the interview, I'm going to be asking 2 initial questions, and then I'll go through council in a round robin format. I'll continue to facilitate the process for about 40 minutes to allow a bit of time at the end for Eric to provide some closing remarks to stick with the schedule. So I apologize in advance if I need to interrupt at any time. With that, Eric, thank you so much for your interest in the city of Ann Arbor. This is a critical role. And again, we're really looking forward to getting to know you a little bit better tonight. So my first question is, why are you interested in this position?
I'm interested in this position because I think that Ann Arbor is one of the most special communities in the Midwest, if not the entire country. I had a chance to get to know Ann Arbor intimately when I was a law student at the University of Michigan. And it was really there in a major way that I fell in love with the idea of cities and the revitalization of cities. And I think that, I grew up in a time, as did many of you, where cities were on the decline. There was, in this part of the country in particular, if not in Ann Arbor, a great deal of loss of manufacturing jobs in places like Sandusky, where I grew up. There was urban sprawl that was decimating many, many communities. And while Ann Arbor was facing those issues, it responded to them in really, progressive ways by doing things like creating the Green Belt. And it's always really been a leader and an outlier within that part of the country. And so as I left Ann Arbor and returned to Cleveland and then eventually to Sandusky, I did so with a love of cities and of urban living and a desire for equity and really the celebration of local culture at a time where it felt pretty hard to come by. And I would describe that as a vocation. I'm not someone that desired to necessarily become a public administrator, but was led to public administration and public leadership by a passion to work in cities and to see what is possible on a local level in really our civilization.
Thank you. My second question is, why do you feel you'd be a good fit for this role?
I think that my entire career has prepared me to become the city administrator of Ann Arbor. I would start by saying that spending time in Ann Arbor, while I have not lived there since I graduated from law school in 2005, I'm not a stranger to it. I get back at least 4 or 5 times a year, often for football games, but usually for at least 2 or 3 other occasions as well. And the experience that I have professionally has put me into positions of increasing responsibility, starting in the city of Cleveland, which is a large city that anchors a region of Northeast Ohio, much in the way that Detroit would anchor, Southeastern Michigan, of which Ann Arbor, I think, is a major center of gravity in its own right. Similar to Sandusky, 60 miles to the west of Cleveland, is not a suburb of Cleveland, but has its own center of gravity, but is definitely impacted by what happens in that region. And so the work that I did in the mayor's office in the city of Cleveland really prepared me, and I was able to do that almost right out of law school, to see the systems of how communities function, not only the public services that are delivered directly by the city. And I worked for the chief of staff who reported directly to the mayor, but also the partners, the other public systems, whether those are the educational system, the public transportation system, the library system. And in addition to those systems, the philanthropic partners and the civic partners, it was really a great opportunity for nearly 4 years to sort of see the matrix of how communities function and what the role of the municipality is within that. And then I was able to really cut my teeth in an on the ground way when I left the mayor's office with the blessing of the mayor and my boss, the chief of staff, to run the development corporation in the neighborhood I lived in, which was Ohio City and sat just west of downtown Cleveland, and was a really diverse, integrated neighborhood that was experiencing its own revitalization and had its own set of anchors in the West Side Market and Great Lakes Brewing Company and a Cleveland Clinic Hospital. And I really learned there to partner both with the city, who contracted with us to help them celebrate the West Side Market Centennial, but in addition, those other civic community anchors and institutions to deliver really good results for that community. And 5 years into that, had the opportunity to head back to my hometown of Sandusky to become city manager, where I got that direct executive level municipal experience in creating budgets and really, though, continued the work that I learned to do in Cleveland, both in those larger systems level in the public sector, but then on the ground with the Development Corporation in Ohio City, where we partnered to work with our stakeholders, Cedar Point obviously being a large one, but also our hospital system, a bank headquarter here, local foundations, and our residents, to really transform a place that had been hit very, very hard over the last 30 or 40 years. And I'll hopefully get a chance to talk about some of those outcomes in this interview. But all of that has prepared me for Ann Arbor. And I can tell you in closing that had it not been Ann Arbor, had I not seen the listing, I've seen many listings for positions in the 6+ years I've been in Sandusky, but not for my connection to Ann Arbor. Someone told me once that means a great deal to me, that timing is the great sorting mechanism of life. And I think all of the choices that I've made, whether it was time to change positions or to try a new opportunity, it was because the timing was right. And I see Ann Arbor, which is this excellent community that has been an outlier and a leader with progressive policies and local governance, but it's also going through a transition of its own as it relates to trying to figure out how to remain affordable, how to be a leader within the world as it relates to solving climate change issues at a local level. And I'm proud of what I've accomplished in Sandusky, but I feel ready that this would be a great new adventure at this time. And I'd be excited to talk to you about it more this evening.
Thank you so much. Next, I'd like to invite Councilmember Eaton to provide the first question.
Well, Eric, thank you for showing interest in this position. In reading through the materials that you provided, I note that you replaced someone in Sandusky who had been discharged by the city council. And
yes.
In the previous 14 years, they'd had 7 city administrators.
Yeah.
Maybe you could reflect on your style of management that has allowed you to survive apparently considerably longer than anybody else in recent history in Sandusky.
Absolutely. And hopefully I have not only survived, but thrived and really helped to deliver on the city. And I think it was because of the volatility that they'd had in the city manager position. And there was a commission that was coming on board in 2014 that had been elected in 2013 that knew that the city had hit, in their words, rock bottom from the perspective of it had never really climbed out of the previous recession. And it had dropped from 300 employees to about 200 employees over about a 9-year period. And morale was really low. There was almost no communication with Sandusky and its external stakeholders, whether that be Cedar Point or the bank or the hospital. And it was just a sense that something had to change. And so I think again, with the timing question, I knew it was a time because I saw that there were some nascent things happening in the downtown. There were some entrepreneurs that were reinvesting. Cedar Point or Cedar Fair, which is the parent organization of Cedar Point, had a new CEO who had come in from Disney and I think had a relatively enlightened perspective about what a community partnership could look like. And so I really took a chance on Sandusky, and they took a chance on me, who at that time at least was a relatively non-traditional candidate for a city manager position. And we built consensus. I didn't necessarily build a relationship with the new majority on the city commission, but I tried to build a relationship with every member of the city commission. And that doesn't mean that choices weren't made, but we worked really hard. And I do think there's a moment with a new city administrator or a new city manager where, particularly if there's consensus on that hire, you have an opportunity to mend fences and to rebuild. And so we really took the occasion to do that. We had to move really quickly. We partnered with Cedar Point on a tax issue that was they had previously tried 3 income tax increases in Sandusky, all of which have been rejected. The last one, I think, with about 64% of the community rejecting it, even as they were hemorrhaging positions and services were declining dramatically. And the residents wanted to double the admissions tax on Cedar Point, and there was a group. And I think the city commission on some level felt stuck in the middle. So one of the things that they asked me to do in my first several weeks was to go meet with the new CEO and the general counsel of Cedar Fair, and then that resident group. And what went from a doubling of the admissions tax or a 0.5% on the income tax became a joint 1% on the admissions tax and a 0.25% that went back before the public with stated goals. Cedar Fair really wanted to see us investing in economic development because we'd seen a great deal of decline and they didn't want to be sort of the piggy bank, I guess I would say, for Sandusky. And then in addition to that, our residents wanted to see a serious commitment to the revitalization of our neighborhoods and the quality of services and infrastructure we were providing for them. And we really kind of thread that needle, and it passed with 60% of the vote. And then we transitioned direct, and that was passed. It was put on the ballot after a lot of hard work by all seven commissioners. And we went straight into a bicentennial vision plan, which was a 5-year vision for how we were going to direct those new resources and programs that, again, after a year long of meeting in every neighborhood, public surveys, focus groups, community meetings, passed again 7-0 and really gave us that template. I know Ann Arbor is looking at potentially a new master plan, and maybe that's a process in which we can arrive at that similar consensus. But that template then everybody was bought into, and we had an opportunity for at least a few years. And of course you get away from that the further you get from the conception of it. But we've absolutely had buy-in, and we've accomplished great results, including, really significant partnerships with our outside entities and institutions within the city.
Thank you. Councilmember Grand.
Thank you. Mr. Webster, welcome, and thank you for taking the time. I know this is, the fourth one of these this evening, and that's no easy feat. I want to build upon something that you mentioned about coming into an organization where staff morale was low. And can you talk to us a little bit about how you build up that staff morale and how that experience could translate here to Ann Arbor?
Absolutely. And I would say that that is one of the things that I am personally most proud of at both my first stint as an executive leader, as the executive director of what became Ohio City Incorporated, and then at a much larger scale as the city manager of the city of Sandusky. I remember very early, Ohio City Near West Development Corporation, which was the name of the organization. We went through kind of a rebranding as we restated our mission in 2011. It was looked at as a struggling CDC because of really difficult neighborhood politics. It had an elected neighborhood board, and there was a great struggle in that neighborhood as to whether they would support affordable housing or whether they felt like more market rate investment was what was necessary because they already had the vast majority of the public housing on the west side of the city of Cleveland, which is in a segregated Cleveland. The west side is typically the more white side of town, unfortunately. And foundations had tired with that political battle. They wanted to see them get on the right side of that issue. Funders, institutions in the neighborhood, including Lutheran Hospital, which is a Cleveland Clinic Hospital, St. Ignatius High School, which is a preparatory academy in that community, and the Great Lakes Brewing Company, which is a really progressive brewing company that was founded and still in Ohio City. And so we came in with a really poor reputation, and we had to rebuild funding. We had to rebuild credibility with those institutions. And I remember a staff person saying, who's still there today, which I'm actually really proud of. Not every staff person that I inherited in that organization was there for good reasons. But he said, well, something went wrong. And he said, well, we're the crappy CDC or Community Development Corporation in Cleveland. And I said, don't say that. And I paused him right there. And I'm like, that's not who we're going to be. And it wasn't to tear him down, but it was to build him and our sense of esteem up. And what I would say is we came out of the gates in Ohio City with a market district vision plan, which was how we were going to build on the centennial of the West Side Market, which is kind of their version of an Eastern Market or your version of Carytown and Zingerman's and the Farmers Market, to really rebuild that commercial district, which at that time was 40% vacant, and make Ohio City a hub for the local food movement, which is really just starting to take off in Cleveland. And we led with vision. Our board, those institutions, and the staff. And as people got excited and they knew that they could be a part of something that was really special, the people that wanted to be a part of that organization, or both the ones who were there already and those who we brought in, their capacity, their talents, that talent level grew. And I think that the more we developed a reputation for getting things done and for being a part of a turnaround, not only of the organization, but the neighborhood, that job got easier and easier. And then I'd say the same thing for Sandusky. We had atrophied from 300 employees to nearly 200 employees by the time I got here. And we were very fortunate to secure those new revenues. And we took, at the time I got to Sandusky, we had a community development, planning, and economic development department that was down to 1.5 people. And I ran a neighborhood development corporation in Cleveland with 9 or 10 people by the time that I left. And so we had to have the courage to build that department up, and we had a chance to bring in new people who could develop those new programs because we set aside $500,000 a year for economic development and $500,000 a year for housing. So I think when you have a bold vision, as this council has demonstrated on issues like affordable housing, on climate neutrality, people want to be a part of that, but you also have to create a culture where they know that they're going to be rewarded for their work and that they can, I think political situations can be really difficult to be a staff person in because the goals tend to be really ambitious, but the consequences tend to be really severe when things go wrong. And I think you need to create a sense that people can have room to make some mistakes as long as it's in furtherance of the mayor and the council's agenda. I think it's my role to be the one communicating with council and the mayor back to staff that they will be supported, they will take chances, because I think that's how you avoid people getting alligator arms where they don't really reach for opportunity, but instead they keep their heads down. And I'm really proud of the way that we've done that, both in Ohio City and Sandusky. And I would love to be a part of, creating that culture with the staff in Ann Arbor to really take on what those goals that you've set for your community are, which are ambitious and exciting, and why I'm interested in this position.
Councilmember Griswold.
Welcome. And I really appreciated your comparison of the University of Michigan to Cedar Point. And I've learned something now, alligator arms. That's a great concept. My question is, how do you ensure transparent and effective communications? And specifically, how do you seek feedback to make sure that your audience is hearing what you're trying to say?
Absolutely. And I know that Ann Arbor is a community that demands transparency of its elected officials. I've watched a few of your council meetings, and I know that you get a lot of commentary. And I know that that's Ann Arbor's culture. It's been that way for a long time. You are a community of advocates. You are a community of educated people who are passionate about making their community a better place. And so I think the more, and I have always prided myself, and really my city commission in Sandusky has always demanded transparency. I think Sandusky has a history of some challenging things politically, but one of the things that I do not believe that they have had challenges with is really in being transparent. And so I continue that culture, even at times when it can be frustrating, because you need to build that trust. And so I would really look to the city council and the mayor and the elected officials of the city to help me understand their goals as to transparency. But what I can tell you is I am a naturally transparent person, and I would expect that of staff, because I think when you are transparent and you're open, is disagreements. I always say to people, come in the front door. I hate when you find out about challenges, whether that's with one of my elected officials, from another elected official, or you find out about it from one staff person and another department director is upset about something you said in a conference call. I really think if you create the culture where there's an expectation that people come in the front door, and that conflict doesn't necessarily have to be unhealthy, but it can be healthy because you resolve those issues and you can continue to have a trusting relationship with people that you disagree with. And I do think that that's something that, again, if that tone is set at the very top by the mayor and the council, and that trickles down through me to the staff, I think that we will absolutely maintain that legacy of transparency that Ann Arborites expect, and get a lot done while we're doing it.
Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us here tonight. Let's see. I got a couple questions. Hopefully somebody will ask the other one. So we, as you mentioned, you followed some of the things that happened here in Ann Arbor, and some of the what some might call kind of lofty plans and goals and visions and such we have as a community. And yet we do have financial uncertainty right now for the next couple of years. And I also, I think, to me, one of the things I would like to see in an administrator is someone who, one thing I hate more than anything is getting calls and repeated calls from residents when there's some problem, and they've asked me to forward the problem and escalate the issue with staff and so on, and then it doesn't get fixed. So what would you do to ensure that staff's able to continue to provide high quality services and amenities to residents, even while you're asked by some council guidance to pursue other goals outside of these considered services that people expect from a city?
Absolutely. And what I would say as it relates to constituents.
I got to be honest, I'm having a terrible time hearing you.
Is everyone else having a hard time hearing me? I'm going to scooch up. I hope that I'm not crowding the screen, but I'm going to try to talk.
No, you're fine. Thanks.
Better. That's way better. Thank you.
Better. Appreciate
Sorry
it.
about that. Let me come in the front door. Let me know if you can't hear me, because I want to be heard. So thank you very much for that. So as far as constituent services, as it relates to council requests, as they come in, because you're hearing from residents, I think it's important, and I've always encouraged staff, and I learned this in Cleveland, working in the mayor's office, which had a very strong ward-based system there. The ward politicians were very strong and really impacted the mayor's ability to get things done from the executive perspective, is that every department had an expectation that there was an ability to resolve constituent concerns that came up through channels like council, and that there should be time and resource dedicated so that you had some slack or some capacity to take those things on. But the best way to resolve that is to have better systems in place for service delivery. And when our commissioners are coming to me with constituent service requests, not only do I forward that to the right department or allow them to, I don't necessarily feel the need to be a middle person on that, because oftentimes that can slow it down. Occasionally I like to be a CC depending on the situation, but I don't always need to be. But because I trust my directors will take that concern seriously. But the most important thing you can do in that regard is to build better systems so that less is slipping through the cracks. And of course, that can become more difficult when the financial status is changing. But if you want to continue to have the support of constituents and residents and voters, in order to tackle affordability, in order to tackle climate change, there has to be a trust in the competence of our ability to deliver basic services. And so we have to find a way to continue to do that. And we know at times when resources are dwindling, we're going to have to tighten our belts and we're going to have to make difficult choices. But I'll say a few things because I know Ann Arbor's in a difficult situation now financially. Sandusky on a per capita basis is actually probably in a much more significant short-term economic challenge because of the impact of COVID-19 and the pandemic on our tourism industry, which is a $2 billion industry in our region. And with Cedar Point, Ann Arbor seems to be, through my research, really heavily dependent on property taxes, which will take a hit, but tend to take a hit more slowly during economic challenges. Things like an admissions tax collection paid on purchases of Cedar Point tickets and lodging taxes and income taxes tend to decline much more quickly. And so we're facing on a $24 million budget this year, a $7 million shortfall. Now, fortunately, we have been very strong in setting aside a reserve. We had a reserve of about $5.2 million on a $24.7 million general fund budget this year. We also had a $1.1 million stabilization fund, but we've had to make really difficult choices financially, including all director level staff took a 10% pay reduction. Non-director level administrative staff took a 5% pay reduction. We haven't made any cuts to our union positions, but we did have 6 positions that were hired that were destined for vesting in our AFSCME union that at the union's direction, we let go before they vested so that union members didn't have to be let go. And then 8 administrative staff, which is incredibly painful. The first time I've had to do layoffs, had to be let go. And some of whom were really key players for the city. In addition to that, we cut a lot from our capital budget. We have received some stimulus dollars for public transportation because we do run public transportation for the greater Sandusky region and some stimulus that we've been able to dedicate towards police and fire wages. But we've had to make really difficult cuts. But this gets into the point of basic services versus priorities and hopefully brings everything full circle a little bit, is that we didn't cut any of our new initiatives. When we passed issue 8 in 2014, we created programs to fund housing and blight elimination. We created programs to fund economic development. And then since then have created new programs related to things like public art and cultural programming. Nothing got zeroed out because I think the Sandusky Commission had lived through the last recession when we got rid of basically nearly all of our administrative staff to protect safety services and some very basic public services. And all of our programs, decimated our ability to attract investment into our housing stock and our economy. And we don't want to do that now. So some programs did get cut as much as 80%, but nothing got zeroed out so that we don't lose the ability to use those muscles, I guess I would say, when we start to come back. And then the last thing I'd say about the financial status of the city is we've been very fortunate to receive a grant from the National Resource Network, which is a national consortium of nonprofits that do urban revitalization work. And because of our unique status with Cedar Point being down for most of this year, we got a grant to do a 5-year financial forecast with a public financing firm out of Philadelphia called PFM. And they've really helped us put together a 5-year forecast of revenues and expenses that myself and my finance director work very closely with them on. And we think we can get through this year and next without any further cuts. And then there's going to be some really difficult choices as to, do you continue to see as things climb back out a slightly lesser provision of services or programs, or do you have to ask questions of the community and it would be their prerogative and the commission's prerogative? But I feel really good about potentially transitioning because I will tell you, with Sandusky being my hometown and me being so proud of what we've accomplished, I wouldn't want to leave them and leave that progress behind, but for this great opportunity in Ann Arbor, because we have that 5-year plan in place, because I think we've already made the toughest cuts we're going to have to make, I'd feel comfortable making this transition at that time.
Councilmember Lum. And however you moved most recently, I think improved the volume the best.
Okay, I'm gonna lean in just so you all can hear. So I apologize if you're gonna see too much of my face, but I'll do my best.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks. And thank you, Mr. Webster, for your interest and for joining us tonight. It's nice to meet you, even if by Zoom. So I was going to ask you about because you talked about this in your phone interview, the pandemic-related budget impacts in your plan. You just walked us through that nicely. So I will weave a different question that touches on your financial acumen and also community engagement. So in Sandusky, and Councilmember Griswold touched upon this because you've mentioned that your dominant entity and employer is Cedar Point. You did share a bit what you learned from that experience when they brought in their new CEO, how you built consensus. I'm wondering, so I have two questions. If you could expand on what you learned from that experience that you might believe might be applicable in the city of Ann Arbor's improving its relationship with our dominant entity, the University of Michigan. And then kind of the second part of this, just in terms of community engagement in working through, plans and challenges. You described the Bicentennial Vision Plan as a successful process, and in terms of new development and investment. And so my question is about, improving the relationship with the university, what you learned from working with Cedar Point. Dan, could you make that comparison? And if you could also elaborate a bit on the public engagement aspect of what you did with the Bicentennial Vision Plan, what you did with Cedar Point, and if you've used a similar approach in other areas of city services and the city budget and all things that a city administrator is charged to do. Thank you. Hope that's
Absolutely. And please, someone interrupt if you're having a hard time hearing me. I'll start with Cedar Point, and there is a list of things that I can talk about that those partnerships have yielded for our community. And it starts with that tax increase in 2014, in which they voluntarily agreed to raise the admissions tax in order to be a part of the solution or the progress that we wanted to make in Sandusky. But then it continued right from that, as they were a funder and a participant in the Bicentennial Vision Plan and the community engagement process in that, which I'll touch quickly on now and come back to if there's time. But at the end of that process, in which we touched every neighborhood, 2,000 residents, focus groups, surveys, community stakeholders, one-on-one interviews, 6 community organizations, including Cedar Point, who had just had their admissions tax, which they pay 98% of in the city of Sandusky, agreed to fund that Bicentennial Vision Plan with at least a $250,000 commitment to projects. And I think what was interesting, and I think this gets to how you might forge partnerships, whether it's with U of M or with any other stakeholder in Ann Arbor, is we gave them some ability to dictate what their $250,000 or more, in some cases, investment was going to be invested in the community. And what I find with community partnerships is too often the city wants one thing from the partnership and the stakeholder wants something else. And ultimately, I think you have to find areas that are genuinely mutually beneficial to the strategic visions for both the organization and the community. Of course, we always want folks to altruistically step up and do what's in the best interest of the community. But if you can find the place in the Venn diagram where their interest and the community's interest align, things go much more quickly. And so, for example, on a project that I'm very proud of, and actually really quickly, and I'll touch on this, in addition to the support for the admissions tax and the Bicentennial Vision Plan, we've partnered with Cedar Fair and Erie County and Lake Erie Shores and Islands and Firelands Regional Medical Center to build a $70 million youth recreation sports complex on the eastern edge of Sandusky, which is on an abandoned airport because our county airport and the neighboring county's airport were merged several years ago, and then placed a TIF on the development of that 120,000 square foot indoor facility and 15 field outdoor facility so that we could build a bike trail linking that site back past the Cedar Point dorms and all the way to downtown Sandusky. And we've already completed 1 mile of that. We have 7.5 miles of that designed or finishing the design and funded through different segments to break ground and to be finished. So that was mutually beneficial because they wanted their employees to get there, and that was a huge boost to our tourism-based economy, and the indoor facility creates some year-round opportunities. But in addition to that, we've also partnered with Cedar Fair for Sandusky Transit, which we operate. And now, instead of them providing transportation for their employees, we've entered into a contractual agreement where all of their employees get a bus pass and then can use our fixed route bus system to get to and from, which brings them downtown a lot because they were getting out into the township for big box services. Now they connect to those services downtown. And a lot of times they don't need to make that second connection because they're discovering our downtown. And then finally, the project that I am most proud of is we created a university with Cedar Fair and Bowling Green State University in downtown Sandusky. So our Bicentennial Vision Plan called for our educational levels in Erie County are poor. It hurts our ability to attract economic development. We're a manufacturing town and a service-based hospitality town. And so we needed to raise those levels. We're actually the only community in Ohio that's part of a 4-county region without one 4-year institution of higher education. And so while we benefit greatly from seasonal tourism, our downtown lacks the anchor that a university provides so well in a place like Ann Arbor. It hurts the seasonality of our economy, and it makes it harder for Cedar Fair to stay headquartered here. So we partnered with them and with Bowling Green State University and received a large state capital grant from the state to infill on a surface parking lot on the eastern edge of downtown Sandusky. And our staff just toured that facility yesterday. We are about to open within a week a beautiful 78,000 square foot facility that on the first floor will be a new university presence for that hospitality program. But in addition to that, BGSU is going to start providing, hopefully in the future, additional programs that can be hubbed out of downtown. And so that's something that we're really proud of. And those are the types of partnerships we've engaged in. And so if it were the University of Michigan or any other stakeholder in Ann Arbor, but I know that their shadow looms large in that community as Cedar Point does in ours, I think you start with understanding their goals. You start by understanding the mayor and the council's goals, and you find where those two things intersect. I think climate change, I think transportation, and I've seen some of these efforts at regional transportation connections and certainly have some questions about some of that, but clearly there's a goal to build stronger connectivity between Detroit and Ann Arbor. There's a goal stated by the university and the city to get to climate neutrality. You know, where is there a meaningful partnership that benefits both of those goals? And I guess that's where I'd start. But again, it starts with the council's direction, it starts with the mayor's direction, and it starts with an ability to begin to develop those external relationships. And I do think that that is one of the stronger things that my experiences have brought is to build those relationships in mutually beneficial ways. And once people see a partnership that's successful, you'd be surprised how other community institutions step in and they want to be partnering too because they start to feel left out of that. And I think that's what happened in a really mutually beneficial way in Sandusky.
Thank you very much.
Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you. My question for you is, how would you handle a situation where you were directed by council to take on a project that would take away resources from another initiative?
So if, I serve at the will of the city council and the mayor as a city manager or city administrator. And so I don't step over the line of a direction that is given to me. I hope that oftentimes if there is disagreement amongst council or between council and staff, that those things can be resolved before there's a direction given by the council. But I know that's not always the case. And so if that direction is given, I am going to follow it because it's the law and it's the policy and that's my job. That being said, I want to really carefully communicate that to those stakeholders, both on the city staff, on the city council, and in the community who are going to be impacted by the program that is negatively affected. And I hope that if council were going to make that directive, that they'd be doing so in light of an agreed upon, or that they'd be doing so in line with the strategic plan that has been set by the city. And certainly circumstances change all the time. None of us, this was supposed to be Cedar Point's 150th birthday. We were opening up a new waterfront pier, a new university. We just opened up a city hall. We're opening 3 new elementary schools in Sandusky. If you would have told me in January or February that we'd be in the position we're in today now, I wouldn't have believed you. And so circumstances change and priorities are going to have to change. But I just hope that we could get to a place where that's a dialogue. And then when the council acts, it is my directive and I will follow it, but I'll do it in as sensitive a way as possible by those who are impacted by that choice.
Thank you.
Councilmember Ramwali.
Thank you, Amy, and thanks, Eric, for your time and interest in joining us here at the City of Ann Arbor. Communication is one of those things that is spoken of frequently, but it's not practiced as often as it needs to be.
Sure.
And this is a community that prides itself on having information and working with it. How do you ensure transparent and effective communication in a very fluid situation, as you described, the challenges that are facing municipalities today with COVID? But on top of that, and the lack of reporting, you don't have newsrooms working like you used to, and the consolidation of media in different modes and et cetera. Seems like we're all in our own echo chambers, et cetera. How do you disseminate the information in a transparent and an effective way?
So the first thing I would say is that it requires trust. because I think, I have a few council members or commission members in Sandusky that are often surprised by certain things. And I'm always a little bit surprised by what they're surprised by, because I really do try to communicate all of the high level things. But we've got 250 staff. We serve 25,000 people. There are constantly plates spinning that sometimes I'm not even aware of. And so I think where it really starts from an administrator to council and mayor level is to develop trusting relationships on an individual basis, so that if they know that something wasn't communicated, it's not always intentional. There is a daily miracle of a city waking up in the morning and going to bed at night, and everything that has to come together with universities and healthcare systems and services being provided. And so there is always going to be something that doesn't get communicated. But that being said, if you know that as an administrator, my overall goal is transparency, and I quickly correct if there was something that you wanted to be made aware of when it happens, hopefully you'll trust that it wasn't intentional and it wasn't a purposeful decision to not communicate. That being said, my goal would be to be over communicative until I knew where that line is as to what should or shouldn't be communicated. And then I would say, as far as your community engagement, we've seen some struggles with our daily newspaper as well. We still do have a newspaper that prints, but only fewer days a week than it used to, et cetera. We've really done our best to try to engage the community directly. We had no social media accounts at the city when I started, and a clip book or clip art website that was almost embarrassing on some level. And I think everybody involved with it would have admitted that. We've tried to engage directly. We've done it interactively through videos. We post, and we're finding a lot of interactions. Having started from zero in 2015 to where we're at today. And so I think we can communicate directly, and you have to make sure that you do that in really transparent ways, so that it doesn't look like you're communicating anything that is with an opinion that would cause controversy. But I'm really proud of the community engagement. And I'm also, Ann Arbor has been a model for so many other things. If local journalism truly is threatened, I've seen other municipalities or foundation communities, really talk about how they can help support local journalism in objective ways. And if that was something that the council and the mayor really wanted to dive into, I think that'd be a fun project to talk about with partners as to how do we ensure local journalism can continue to happen in spite of the turbulence in that industry on a national or international basis.
Thank you.
Councilmember Smith.
Hey, thanks for joining us tonight. It's a pleasure to hear about your experiences, and thank you for your interest in coming to Ann Arbor. My question this evening is I'm very interested to understand about what you feel the city administrator's role is, particularly in Ann Arbor, and how it works best with city council.
Absolutely. And I think that there is a key distinction between where Sandusky was when I started and its form of government, while similar to Ann Arbor, and where Ann Arbor is today. And I think it came up earlier that my predecessor was terminated by a split 4-3 vote. And one of the things that their critique was of that individual was that there wasn't enough external communication to the community. There weren't partnerships being developed with external stakeholders. So their whole process in selecting a city administrator was wanting sort of a forward-leaning external individual. And while I was able to do that here, I do know that Ann Arbor, and what I would say is in Sandusky, very dissimilarly to Ann Arbor, they need the city staff to be the gas in more situations, is not the brakes, from the perspective of, the advocacy communities that I'd become accustomed to in Cleveland really didn't exist here. The foundations are much smaller. The typical drivers were not as engaged in Sandusky. And the commission really was looking for best practice guidance. And that's part of why they wanted to bring me in from Cleveland, was because we'd had some success in Ohio City and they knew I was local to Sandusky and they wanted to see that there. That being said, Ann Arbor is in a very different situation, in which I've followed off and on Ann Arbor politics since I've left the law school, but very closely, obviously, in the last several months. There's a lot of gas on this council and in this administration. You guys are pushing forward very quickly and in aggressive ways. And you've got a wonderful spokesperson for this city in your mayor and on this council collectively as a body. And so my role would be different, but I do think that the skill set that I bring could still be very positive in Ann Arbor, because I think that staff, communicating that vision to staff and being the person who's in the office on a day-to-day basis that can take the vision that is set by council and the mayor to those community stakeholders and take what are policy adopted ideas and turn them into real programs or projects or initiatives. And I'm really proud of the way we've done that. So I think that aspect of my skill set is a great fit, but I wouldn't want the council or the mayor or anyone involved to think that just because I have had to be a spokesperson consistently in Sandusky, that wasn't asked of me by the city commission, and that I wouldn't be comfortable if that policy role and spokesperson role came from a much stronger council and mayor in Ann Arbor.
Right, Mayor Taylor, you have the last question.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And echoing the thoughts of my colleagues, thank you, Mr. Webster, for expressing interest in Ann Arbor and for coming back so often. It's great for alum to do that. Keying off a little bit on that last question, we're torn in all sorts of different directions in local government, and so we do that every day as policymakers at council, and that staff of course has to take those considerations into account as well when either implementing or making policy recommendations to council. How should a municipal organization balance interests, do you think? Interests, you'll pardon my dog, the dog really never barks, and I don't know what's going on. Balancing the interests of future community members as we consider the requests or advocacy of current community members. Those interests are occasionally a tension. How do you think through those issues?
I think that's a great question. And I think it is the challenge for communities that are in transition. And Sandusky was clearly a community in transition when I moved back here in 2014. And any external party in Sandusky would have looked at our natural assets, whether it was the presence of Cedar Point here, or our proximity to the Lake Erie Islands, or our beautiful historic downtown overlooking Sandusky Bay. And they would say, you need to redevelop your waterfront, connect connectivity to that from your neighborhood residents. But in many ways, that wasn't what a lot of the existing population was asking for, because they wanted a focus that was specifically on city services. But we also knew, both as a staff and I think as a commission and a lot of our partners as they started to get more engaged, that if we wanted Sandusky to have a future, that we had to unlock the potential of those assets. And so what commission did, and what I tried to do to support them through the creation of the Bicentennial Vision Plan, was to be very ambitious in that plan and to try to really clearly explain to our constituents why we were making these choices. But we knew, I think that as a community leader, particularly as an elected official, but also as a person who supports elected officials, one way to do this job is to wake up every day and put your finger in the air and decide which way the wind is blowing, and to try to be the most popular politician or city leader that you can be on that day. But another way to do the job, and I think the most effective way to do the job, is to, based on community feedback, but also best practices from other communities, and also ideas generated by both council and staff, is to chart a course for your community that positions it to a future. Because the reality is that these places are likely to exist much longer than the people that are in these places now. But I try to, as I work with my city commission, or as I would work with the city council and the mayor in Ann Arbor, is to not get so far ahead of the community that you can't make change without getting voted out of office, because then we lose that support and things tend to fall apart. And so I think it's a and every time we've been on the ballot in Sandusky, which I think it's been like 8 times on various things since I've been here, we've passed with about 60% of the vote. Would I love that to be 70% of the vote or 80% of the vote? Of course I wouldn't. Of course our commissioners would. That being said, I feel like that preserves enough political capital for our commission to keep going. And I would say that that's something that I would say is in the day-to-day role of the staff. Our job would be to support you to the extent you're asking us for policy ideas or ways to implement policy choices that you've made through developing programs and initiatives. I think we got to look to be in that 55 to 60% range consistently, not in every issue. And there are things that we've done in Sandusky that thankfully weren't on the ballot that wouldn't have had that support, but we did them not because we thought they were going to be popular, but because we thought those choices were critically important. And I would look to you as the mayor, and I'd look to the council for the direction of what those things are. But at the end of the day, I think that's how you balance both the future and the current, is that you can be right, but you also have to win. And to win, you have to be sustainable, and you have to be able to have some continuity of leadership, both on council and on staff, to continue to deliver on the needs for the future of the community.
Thank you.
All right, so we've got about 1 minute to provide some closing comments, Eric. Thank you.
First of all, I just want to say thank you to you, Amy. This has been a great process. As I have stated earlier, I was not looking to leave Sandusky, but I saw that this position was open. And I've had mentors tell me in the past that, timing is the great sorting mechanism of life. And it just felt like this was the right time to pursue this opportunity. I've been watching Ann Arbor. I love it as a community. I have children that I think are a perfect age to be in a community with the cultural assets, et cetera. And what I love is it's already this great place to live. It's already this special and iconic place, but it does feel as if its future is at stake. And whether that's addressing the consensus affordability issues and finding out how to address them, or this climate change plan, or the need to address social justice and equity issues, I look at Ann Arbor as a pace setter for the rest of the Midwest and the rest of the country. And this work is a vocation for me, and to be able to do it in the type of place like Ann Arbor with the type of leadership that exists both on the council and the community feels like a once in a lifetime opportunity. And I'd like to ask you to give me this chance, and I promise that I wouldn't disappoint you and that we'd get a lot of good things done on behalf of your constituents and your community.
Thank you so much, Eric, for joining us. With that, that concludes the interviews. For anybody watching, I would like to remind you that there is a link for you to provide input through a community survey on the city's website. Now I'll turn it over to the mayor for public comment and other official business.
Thank you very much, Ms. Zell, and thank you very much to all 4 of our applicants. It was, an outstanding and illuminating evening. So we're grateful for your, jointly and severally for your interest in our town. We now come to public comment general time. Public comment general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment general time, one need not have signed up in advance. To speak at public comment, please dial the number on your screen. That is 877-853-5247. 877-853-5247. Once you are connected, please enter the meeting ID 924-1649-4915. That is 924-1649-4915. Once you've made that connection, please enter *9. That is to say *9 on your keypad. That will indicate that you wish to speak. Speakers will have 3 minutes in which to speak. So please pay close attention to the time. You will know when 30 seconds are remaining by our city clerk. Our city clerk will also notify you when your 3 minutes are up, at which point we ask you to conclude your remarks and cede the floor to the next speaker. Is there anyone who would like to speak at public comment?
Mayor, I don't see any callers for public comment.
Seeing no one, public comment is closed. May I have a motion to adjourn, please? Moved by Councilmember Amlawi, seconded by, I can't see anybody else on my screen. I'm going to pretend. Who's it going to be? Councilmember Smith. Oh, I just pulled it in, so Councilmember Nelson. Councilmember Nelson shall have the honor. All in favor? All opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Amy?